Everyone, I will call this meeting to order at 10 a.m. Welcome to the Texas Real Estate Commission May meeting. Agenda item number 1 calls for pledges, and I'd like Steve Rapp, Director of IT, to lead us in the U.S. Pledge, followed by Denise Sample, Director of Licensing, in the Texas Pledge. Agenda item number 2 is discussion, possible action to excuse any commissioner's absences. Since everyone's here, we will not entertain that motion. Agenda item number 3, report from the chair. I will be brief. We have a lot of staff reports, a lot of committee reports that will give a whole lot more information about what's been going on. I do just want to give a brief update on went to Arello last month. That's a meeting with all the regulatory agencies, real estate agencies across the nation. And glad to say that staff also was engaged with other staff. Jennifer, Denise went. Us, like everybody else, we're experiencing the same issues. Broker responsibility, lack of inventory, professionalism. Did find some really interesting information that other jurisdictions are struggling with as far as timeshares and timeshares registrations and stuff, but it was a good meeting. Like I said earlier, we've had a very busy 6 weeks, 2 months at TREC since our last meeting with the working groups, the task forces, the committees, and each one of them will give their update. I will certainly engage and challenge the commissioners to ask questions about their reports and what their committees are doing, because they are spending a lot of time working for this agency to move not only the agency but the entire industry forward. And I'll be glad to answer any questions, but I won't keep my report brief because everybody will give an update on what's going on. All right, hearing no questions, we'll go to agenda item number 4, and we will start with Chelsea Buckholz, Executive Director.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to have all 9 of you in person. As the chair mentioned, we went to Arello, or I was about to say earlier this month, but it's last month now that it's May. Chair Kestner went, also Commissioner Lerner went, as well as myself and Denise Sample, our Director of Licensing, and Jennifer Wheeler, our Director of Education and Examination Services. I think this is the first time that Jen had gone. Denise had gone 1 or 2 other times, and it was really nice to network with our counterparts and to share thoughts of how we do things. And, there are a lot of ways to do things across the country. 2 things came up over and over again. One has been the chatter in previous Arello meetings, that's wholesaling. Several additional states have or are considering legislation to regulate wholesaling in some way or another, either requiring a license, to expand disclosure, to redefine what equitable interest is, which is the kind of the basis of wholesaling. There's a lot of different approaches across the country, and hearing those is very informative to our process here. Wholesaling is a conversation that'll be part of our workshop tomorrow, so we can talk about that in more detail to the extent that you would like. I also talked about broker responsibility. That came up with several states on just what are you doing to increase broker responsibility. That's a big topic. Some states are automatically bringing in a broker to all enforcement actions. We do that on most cases when appropriate. Some states don't allow any delegation of authority to a supervisor from a designated broker, which I thought was interesting. And, ultimately, the discussion built my confidence on the direction this commission is headed with that and the progress made in that regard. We'll have more discussion on that topic also at the workshop tomorrow. It's helpful just to know that each jurisdiction is struggling with the same issues. These are topics that have come up on several occasions, not just at Arello or in this meeting, but with license holders across the state. The chair and I had a workshop, or were invited to participate in a workshop last week, or a webinar, where these same topics came up. And it was helpful to talk about the question comes up in a lot of different ways. The main question is, why aren't you regulating these license holders to a higher standard? Why aren't you requiring brokers to manage their people better? Something like that. The question was even asked in last week's webinar, can you raise fees in order to eliminate, would that help? No, we cannot do that sort of thing. We have a fee structure that funds the work that we do. It's not meant to manage the behavior of our license holders. But one thing that we explained there is that in Texas, there is a political climate that is open for business, right? There are a lot of new companies coming to Texas, and that means that the housing market is affected by all of those companies coming to Texas. Texas open for business, I believe, is part of the economic development model in Texas. Well, that same model requires regulating in the least restrictive means, and that's where we come in. And so the merging of those two ideas into one, Texas Open for Business, is the environment in which we work. Moving on to today. I'm excited about several items that are before you today. Gary Mailer will be with us from Texas A&M Real Estate Research Center. He's a friend to me and a friend to this agency for a long time. I'm looking forward to his report on the economic outlook of Texas and a report on what's happening at the center. There's a lot going on at this center, so I thank Gary in advance for being here. You'll also see the first draft of the budget that will need to be adopted in August, not today. It's not for your approval, but we would love your feedback on if what you're seeing is what you want to see. We want to make sure as staff that we are developing a draft that meets your approval. Between this meeting and the next meeting, we'll have another budget draft, and then in August it will be ready for your actual approval. As usual, our biggest cost for the agency is our salary and wages, but it's also our biggest asset. That's our people. And we have money to cover that and then some. We also have a big IT project in the works, and we have talked to you about this on several occasions. It's what we're calling the RAMP project. And it is also a cost driver. In the coming months, we will have a much better idea of the extent of that cost, and it can better inform the budget for that final round in August. We have received best and final offers from the proposed vendors and are reviewing those, that BAFO, I believe it is called. And so between now and the next meeting, we will choose a vendor, negotiate a contract, and that contract will be before you for your approval in August. Also before you today is the strategic plan. There are no significant changes to that plan from past years, mainly because there were no significant changes to the instructions given to us on what that plan should look like. So you will see a similar document, though we did try to shorten it, make it more streamlined, easier to read, easier for all of us. Tony's going to tell you more about that, and that has been a project that he's worked very hard on. So with that, I will conclude. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Next up will be Tony Slagle, Deputy Executive Director.
Good morning, Chair Kestner, Commissioners. Tony Slagle, Deputy Executive Director. Normally, I would be providing an update on my monthly customer service report, but since it's May 2nd, I haven't actually sent that out to all of you for April. So I do have some some preliminary numbers. I don't believe they will change much, if at all, but I did want to report on those. In April, we had 15,830 calls come into the contact center. 14,739 of those, or 93%, were TREC related. The overall abandonment rate for the month of April was 3.2% and 3.24% for TREC related calls. The overall average hold time for April was 1 minute and 29 seconds and 1 minute and 33 seconds for TREC related calls. There were 4 days where we went over that 2-minute threshold target that we always try to meet. April 18th was the Monday after Good Friday. We were closed on Good Friday. Every time we're closed during a day, there's an uptick in calls. We had a 2-minute and 7-second hold time, so just over it. April 29th, it was 2 minutes and 22 seconds. That was when renewal notices went out. They all wait for May. Renewal notices for May, June, and July, I believe. And those always also have an uptick in calls. The 25th of April, it was 3 minutes and 15 seconds. We were down by 3 members of staff on that day, so that's what the rationale was there. And on the 26th, the division had their staff meetings. They split those up, so everybody doesn't get off the phones. They split them up between people, and so they had a bit of an uptick. It was 2 minutes and 12 seconds on that day. The good news is on emails, not that any of that's not good news, but on emails, this is the second month in a row, in the third month, January, March, and April, where we had 100% answered 100% of all emails within 1 business day. So the contact center staff is really working hard on hitting that metric. There are currently 3 vacancies and 1 person on medical leave. Robert Hood, the director of that division, is working hard to fill those positions. I did want to also let you know that we have recently implemented this call recording software, which we've been working on, and that's in place to help with training and quality assurance. There's a message, if you call, there's a message on the hold time informing people that they're being recorded. So that is something that's been recently implemented. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll let the staff come up and give you more detailed information.
Any questions? All right, I've got just one quick one. When the renewals go out, and I should probably know this, is there a reference on the renewal how to find what hours you need on the website as far as view educational information?
I believe the email that goes out does tell them to go to the website to do that.
But it's very helpful. Very helpful. Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Speaking of customer service relations, Robert Hood, Director, is next. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Robert Hood, Director of Customer Relations Division. I will be reporting on the Customer Relation Report, and all the stats will reflect through March of 2022. And in March, all metrics for the division trended in a very positive direction. The call volume for March was a little bit over 18,000 calls, which was about a 14% increase than the previous month. The hold time for March was 1 minute and 15 seconds compared to the 1 minute and 34 seconds in February. For the month of March, we had 20 customer service representatives answering calls. There were 2 days in March where we exceeded our 2-minute hold time target. One day was Tuesday, March 8th. This is when we expired the February licenses, so there was a 2-minute and 11-second hold time and just over 900 calls that day. And then the second day in March when we were over 2 minutes was on Tuesday, March 15th, when we ran renewal notices. We received over 1,000 calls that one day, and the hold time was 5 minutes and 9 seconds for those. We had 18 staff answering calls on that day. The comparison between TREC and TALCB calls is consistent, about 90% for TREC and 10% for TALCB. Then on page 16 in your meeting materials, you'll find the results of our customer satisfaction survey. As usual, most of our customers that choose to complete our survey are contacting us via telephone, and they are more than likely a real estate sales agent. Our email rate for March is still lower than what I would like to see it. We only received 26 respondents to our email survey, and 4 of those respondents rated their experience with us as poor. We followed up with all those individuals and made sure that all their needs were met. And 98% of our customers surveyed us, 98% of the customers that were surveyed rated their telephone experience as excellent. On the next page, page 17, this is our 12-month overview of the calls presented to the contact center and the hold times for each respective month. And you'll see in the last 3 months there's been a steady decline in our hold time, even though there's been variances in the number of calls that we've received. On the next page, 18, you will find the total number of emails processed within the last 12 months. In March, we completed about 4,796 emails, and 100% of those emails were handled within 1 business day. And as Tony mentioned earlier, the same thing for April. 100% of our emails were handled within 1 business day. And then the last page of the report, this is our fiscal year comparison. This is an average of every month of each respective fiscal year and the hold time for that fiscal year. So right now we are averaging about 16,000 calls per month, and our hold time right now is about an average of 1 minute and 50 seconds for this fiscal year. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yes, I have one.
Commissioner Williams.
So have your calls increased over time?
There has been a slight increase every month.
Now, are you looking for a consistency or radiance? Because it seems like it fluctuates according on what time of year it is.
According to what time of year, I think it's going to continue to fluctuate.
Okay, but for what you guys are doing, do you guys look for a consistency or, maybe a variance? Because I've seen a fluctuation like this. Do you want to kind of decrease that?
I'm not sure if there's anything we can do in order to control the amount of volume that we receive. But usually we try to. I mean, we
No, not the volume. I'm talking about the whole time.
The whole time. Mm-hmm. Well, staffing the contact center with 24 representatives will hopefully handle the whole time and keep us below that 2-minute target. Yes.
So it's dictated by the number of support team you have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. Yes,
Commissioner Pena.
On March 15th, you said you got over 1,000 calls?
Yes.
On March 15th? And what was the nature of those calls? And if the second part of that question is, based on the type of call, is there any information dissemination that can be made to avoid those type of days?
On March 15th, that's when we ran our renewal program. So we sent out the renewals for, I think it was April, May, and June. Mm-hmm. And that renewal period had 5,000 more renewals than the previous month. So it was just a lot more renewal notices that we sent out that month. So that was one cause for the increase. And we do have information on the renewal notices that tell people to go, how to check their CE credit and all that and do everything online. But still, people receive those notices and they just want to call us and talk to someone.
Right. They want to talk to a live body.
Yeah, want to talk to a live body.
So all of those calls, were they more, I guess, more lengthy or complicated that the staff had to deal with? Do y'all track how long each call is lasting?
Yes. On average, our talk time is about 5.5 minutes with customers. Usually during those high peak times, there are some more complicated calls, telling people what credits they need to complete, those different types. So yes, the calls are a little bit more lengthy.
But these are hold times, so these are people waiting on hold. I mean, they can't even talk to anybody at this point because of just the sheer volume of calls that have come in, and there's not enough people to take the calls, so that's why you see that spike up.
Yeah, and generally, I track the number of calls we receive on an hourly basis, mm-hmm. and generally during our lunchtime is when we receive a lot of calls, and that's when our hold times start to build a little bit and kind of mm-hmm. drive the average up for the entire day.
Right.
Yes, we try to do that for, well, I think that's a programming thing with our, the way that we send out the notices. And we expire everybody at the end of the month. And so I think it's a programming thing with our, the way we send out the notices.
There's still a message on the hold. There's a hold message that tells them how they can go to the website or,
Yes.
or communicate by email as well.
Yes, depending on what option they choose for our hold message, well, what option they choose, and when they call to speak with us, it tells them where they can go find the status of the application, or where they can go see their CE credit, all kind of different things while they're waiting on hold. It's a loop that they'll continue to listen to.
There's also the callback feature.
Yes, and they can also leave their telephone number, and we'll give them a call back.
I was just going to say that we can explore options for addressing this in various ways. That we were just over here saying, what if we do this in batches? But I think it might be a programming issue. Thankfully, we won't be on this program forever. So, though I'm not sure, Steve and I have been talking about how with the expectation of a new program, there's kind of the fairy dust of it's going to fix all things. But maybe it could fix something like this. So we'll look into that and see if we can kind of find additional ways to just make that one day, the renewal notice day, not such a heavy day.
So was this renewal queue up of several months of licensee renewals, or is it a one-time event, or is it something we can expect at the next quarter?
It's a renewal that happens every month, but this was a bigger one.
Yes, there's a 30-day notice, a 60-day notice, and a 90-day notice all going out at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So it's just an unusual month with a
It was
lot of
just
volume.
500 more renewals. There was 5,000 more renewals sent out than the previous month.
So that won't happen too often, right? I mean,
It depends on, I think it can correlate to maybe 2 years ago when we had an increase in license holders. So now all these, from 2 years ago, it's time for all these people to renew. So it's kind of a circular thing.
yeah. Mr. Chairman, the way the membership or the licensee holders are just growing, I mean, it would behoove us to keep an eye on this, because it's gonna, the amount of licensees is gonna keep causing these type of issues, I think.
Totally agree. And probably a couple things. The renewal notices need to be sent out timely. You know, I think it's 30, 60, 90, you know, splitting them up is probably not solve the problem. I did note that you said there was only 18 on staff that day. So,
Short staff that day.
yeah, so short staff that day, plus they went out. And so I want to be very clear, you know, we don't want 5 minutes, but overall, I mean, your department's doing a wonderful job. We just need to keep working on these little outliers. You know, it's going to happen. And with the increased number of licenses and the renewals coming up, you know, I know you and Tony are working together to staff for these, and it's going to come up. But we appreciate everything you're doing to address it. And if there's anything we can do as a commission to help, just let us know.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? All
One
right,
more
thank you.
comment. I think you may need to get with our very creative CFO to get you some more people.
We're working on it.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education and Examination Services.
Good morning, Chair Kestner and Commissioners. Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education and Exams. Before I get to reports, I have a couple of updates I would like to share with you. At the February Commission meeting, I mentioned a project we've been working on that would allow qualifying education providers to post course completion records directly into the TREC database. I'm pleased to announce that that project went live last week. This project is a combined effort on the part of our education team, licensing team, and our IT team, and I want to give everybody kudos who was a part of that project in making this happen. As a reminder, this capability is for education providers of students who already hold a license, and they are completing education as a requirement for salesperson apprentice education, or SAE. And for those who are seeking an upgrade from a sales agent license to a broker license. Others who may benefit are returning license holders, perhaps those who have expired but still maintain a license number. And for the benefit of our public members, I'll just say that every sales agent is required to complete this SAE within the first 2-year term of holding a license. More specifically, the requirement is to complete an additional 90 hours in elective qualifying coursework, or in other words, 3 more 30-hour qualifying courses. Similarly, sales agents who are considering becoming a broker but do not have a college degree are required to complete an additional 630 hours of education in addition to their initial sales agent license requirements and the SAE requirement they're required to complete the first term. So many of these applicants choose to take multiple 30-hour qualifying courses to work toward achieving that goal. Historically, license holders completing qualifying coursework for one of these scenarios have been required to email certificates, course completion certificates, to the licensing division for manual upload by TREC staff. They are put into a queue and processed in date received order, and we receive approximately 500 course completion certificates each week. So this is accomplishing 2,000 document processes each month is what we're fixing. The new program allows qualifying education providers to post the course completion records in real time, creating new efficiencies for both the student and TREC staff in the same way we were able to do when we launched the CE posting system. To refresh, well, and this is just reiterating, to refresh everybody's memory, the key to our successful implementation was the license number. So this is why we are focused only on those that have a license number, and we're able to do this. However, the current VRSA system limitation does not allow us to do this for new applicants that have not yet been issued a license number. However, we do expect that the VRSA replacement system will accomplish this when we bring that on board. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that project.
Any questions? No? Good job.
We're getting great feedback from our education providers, by the way. Okay. The next update I have to share is regarding the education reports. In an effort to make the reports I share with you more meaningful and hopefully more digestible, I've drafted new reports, but first I'll review the original reports, and that is what you have on page 20 and 21 of your materials. On page 20 of your materials, you will see a fiscal year-to-date monthly breakdown of qualifying course and provider applications received and approved. And on page 21, you'll see the same information as it relates to continuing education provider and course applications received and approved. The new reports were provided to you as a supplement to the meeting materials. Thank you, Amber. So the first report is a 13-month comparison of providers and courses approved. They are broken down at the top by application type. The categories are qualifying provider, qualifying courses, continuing education providers, and continuing education courses. Then at the bottom of the same page, you'll see a graphical representation of all applications approved during the 13-month period broken down by month. On this report, you'll notice we had a spike in March of 2021. You'll also notice the upward momentum of the last 4 months reported. With the exception of March 2021, all 4 of the last months have exceeded in overall volume the previous 8. I believe this increase is due to the expansion of classroom courses to include live courses offered through technology. I believe the pandemic has essentially allowed for a new course delivery method that was rarely, if ever, used before. Fortunately, our rule language already allowed for that, and so it was a smooth transition for us to make. The next report is a 5-year look back at the 4 primary applications we process in education. In blue, you'll see the qualifying education providers. In gray, the continuing education providers. In orange, the qualifying courses. And in yellow, the continuing education courses. Given that we still have 5 months of data to collect before we close out FY 2022, I'm inclined to believe that we may exceed the previous 4 years in each category, and I look forward to continuing to monitor that. And the final report before you is a year-over-year comparison of all education applications approved. So we start in FY 2018 and we go to FY 2022 to date. And again, this is a combination of all the education applications approved. I would greatly appreciate any feedback you have on these reports. One suggestion that I've already received is to separate the real estate courses from the inspector courses. I plan to incorporate that in the reports for the next meeting if that's something that you all would like to see. And this concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions and again, take any feedback that you have.
Any questions? I like the format. I don't want to get rid of the old one. If
You don't?
We could have, if we could, maybe, I don't know. I like the old, I like the numbers, but I like that.
Okay, that's great.
Any other questions, comments on the format? All right, very good.
All right, thank you all.
Next up will be Denise Sample, Director of Licensing.
Good morning, Chair Kestner and Commissioners. I'm Denise Sample, the Director of Licensing, and your materials include the licensing reporting data as of March 31st of this year, and the first few pages are the regular presented, reports in the usual format you're used to. But I'm also pleased to present some reformatted licensing reports in today's materials for your review and feedback. These reports have been revised in order to present the data in an easier to read format, and this is intended to be an improvement in how the key licensing data is presented in quarterly commission meetings, as well as some of the committee meetings and the monthly updates to the website. These reports contain the licensing data that you're used to seeing, but some full pages of numbers are replaced with graphs, and this is what they'll look like from here on out, but we do welcome your feedback. So for your reference, the reports in the old format are on page 22 of your materials, but let's start with page 26 of your materials with the new report format. So the first report is a comparison of applications received. In that top left corner is the addition of a new graph showing the overall number of applications received across all license types going back to fiscal year 2017. To the right of that is a fiscal year comparison of broker business entity, broker individual, and sales agent initial applications received. So for all of those remaining graphs on this page, the current fiscal year data is in orange, previous fiscal year data is in blue. We've been closely monitoring the reduction in sales agent applications. As of March, sales agent applications are down by about 7.5% compared to the same period of last fiscal year. However, in December and January, the sales agent applications were down by between 9 and 10%. We'll continue to monitor each month, but we anticipate that reduction should continue as we head into what is historically the busy time of year for applications received, in particular for sales agents. The bottom left corner of this page, you'll see the professional inspector applications received this fiscal year to date are also down compared to last fiscal year. But recall that 2021 was a record year for professional inspector applications due to the change in the requirements for the license. So we had a large influx of applications coming in ahead of that June 30th, 2021 deadline. However, when we compare the total professional or total inspector applications received this fiscal year to date to fiscal year 2020, 2 years ago, we're actually up by about 5%. But that's a figure we'll continue monitoring. The next page is a report on renewal activity. So these graphs show the renewal rate comparisons for fiscal year 2022 in orange and fiscal year 2020 in blue. And the reason we compare 2 years prior is because each of the licenses that we issue are on a 2-year renewal term. So that's how we can get a real apples to apples comparison. The next page is a 13-month comparison of license holders grouped by license type, and these are kind of the key numbers that you guys ask about as a commission. And so if you recall the previous graph, it was a full page of numbers. It showed active, inactive status. And so this is a little more condensed. And right below it is a graphical presentation of the total number of license holders for the last 13 months. The next page shows the 13-month comparisons of license holders grouped by license type. So I do want to point your attention to the easement and right-of-way registrant totals. Those numbers are going down. We don't know, though, how many licensed sales agents are actually performing easement and right-of-way registrant work. It's a number we'll just continue monitoring and reporting on. So the last page is a 13-month comparison of application processing times. As a reminder, this is the average of the cumulative number of days that my team spends reviewing documents submitted with an application. This excludes the time it takes for an applicant to sit for and pass the exam or to clear the fingerprint-based criminal history check. Our target for this metric is 14 calendar days, and you'll see below that, just for reference, is the number of applications received in each reporting month. As a reminder, those aren't necessarily the average doesn't correlate to the number we received that month, because a lot of times we can touch an application 3, 4, 5, 6 times. We could have received it 6 months ago, and we complete our review, sometime during that 1-year application time. So it's just helpful to see if there's a spike in applications in a particular month, we might see an increase in how long it takes us to process. That concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you have and welcome any feedback you might have on the new formats.
Commissioner Woodruff.
I guess this is really a comment. The trade associations, recognizing that's not the complete set of licensees, obviously, but they've projected losses this year, although they've not experienced that yet. But if you look at what the plans were for, and I don't know if that number was 4 or 5%, something like that. And, and I guess there's reasons for that. Obviously the job market's good and there's all this other stuff going on. But I do think that's something to study because as we, live in this new world now, it'll be interesting to see what these license counts do, I think. And so I'm happy you're on top of that. And then obviously that'll have implications to downstream to everything we've talked about in terms of customer service, et cetera. So thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director of Enforcement, Michael Malloy.
Good morning. Chair Kestner, Commissioners, Michael Malloy, Director of Enforcement. I'm going to direct you to my first report, the E1 report on page 31 of your materials. About the past 2 years, I've been reporting on an overall steady increase, or at least a high volume of fitness determinations and application investigations. After reviewing the data from March of last year, these numbers have decreased. They still remain high versus historic numbers, but there has been a overall decrease in those areas. I would like to bring your attention to the fitness determination category. You'll see a bump in the March numbers there, up to 177. We moved our fitness determination online in March. It's not a full application, but it's a step towards the future. And once we get our new licensing database, it's a pretty complicated form that our current database was not able to handle. But this was a step towards that way. Right now, what you can do is you can go online, you can apply for your fitness determination, you input your vital data, which is important, your name, all that type of stuff. So we have all that contact information. You pay the fee online, and then we go in, we run a report, and we'll send the form to them electronically like you get a letter, like when you renew your application type of situation. And then it gives them instructions to fill out the form and then submit it to us via email. So then they can attach all the criminal documents and other explanations they can all electronically. So I think it benefits both sides of the process. It's not perfect, but I think with the new database, it's going to get even better. Obviously, this is all total paper and checks before. So basically, we've taken the time-consuming process of inputting the vital data and cashing all the checks. So there has been a reduction in the need for the time-consuming process for that for personnel. I'd like to thank the IT and licensing departments for the help and cooperation on this project. And I think overall, because of the convenience, we'll see an increase in these fitness determinations from people. And there's been some minor hiccups, but nothing major. And it seems like the public itself have adopted this process pretty smoothly. So I don't have any other items to report on the E1 report. However, we'll be providing additional information regarding case aging and overall case numbers at the workshop tomorrow, so I look forward to that. Moving on to our the case aging report, the E2 report. It reflects that 98% of our complaints are less than 1 year old. You will notice there are 3 cases that are in that 24-month period. They've gone over 2 years. These are all part of one SOA case, and the respondent's been granted continuances on multiple cases, so it's kind of out of our hands, unfortunately. However, next Monday is hopefully this matter will be heard by the SOA judge. So if it all works out timing-wise, it should be in front of the commission come August. So additionally, I reported in February that I was putting additional focus on closing in cases that were within over that 1 year period. Happy to say we've moved that from 4% to 2%. And my overall goal is to hopefully get all of them under 1 year unless they are set for a SOA matter overall by the end of the fiscal year. Moving to my next report, the E3 report, there really hasn't been any changes and trends in regards to subject matter. This concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Any questions? I've got one on the fitness inquiry, fitness determination.
Yes.
Is it difficult to separate those from before they've applied and after? How many of those are actually doing it before they do the application? Are all of them pre-fitness determinations, or some of them during the application process?
Well, if people do it simultaneously, they're already going to go through the full background history. So we typically have to shut down the fitness determination. So we try to be really open, saying, if you're going to do a fitness determination, wait till we can give you the answer. And then depending on the answer, then you can proceed with filing the application.
So all of these are actually prior to filing the application?
That's the way it's
177.
supposed to work. Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Renata Williams, Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Kirchner, Commissioners. Renata Williams, Chief Financial Officer. I'll be presenting the March staff reports for the Financial Services Division. On page 37, you'll find your quarterly budget analysis. This is data through March 31st, and we've collected $8.4 million, which is 57% of our targeted revenue collection. We're slightly below our target, as we should be at 58.3%. In reviewing our historical data, I can see that we traditionally collect revenue that is slightly below our target in the fall and winter months, and then we see an increase in our revenue in the spring and summer months. And a lot of this has to do with when our license holders applied for their license to begin with, and then their subsequent renewal period. The next page gives you a visual representation of our revenue. This page will let you know what our projected revenue collection is for FY22, how much we've actually collected, and how much is still remaining to be collected according to our projections. And as you can see, our license fees make up 90% of our revenue. Miscellaneous fees are 4%, and education and exam fees are 3%. On page 39, this is the quarterly expense analysis. Again, this data is through March 31st. Our expenditures were $7.9 million, which is 46% of our projected expenditure target. We're slightly below our target of 58.3% of budgeted expenditures, but I'm not concerned about our expenses trending lower. We were actually projecting to have more expenditures related to the ramp project, but due to the length and complexity of the contracting process, we have not had those expenditures, which in turn affects our rate of execution. Okay, on page 39. All right. This is our quarterly expense analysis. Again, let's see, am I on page 39? Yes, sorry. Actually, I'm on page 40, sorry. Thank you. The next page, this page right here, gives you the visual representation of our expenses. This page will let you know again what our budgeted expenditures were, how much we've actually spent in those various categories, and the amount remaining available to be spent on our budgeted expenditures. Our personnel costs make up approximately 82% of our expenditures, while our other operating expenses make up the remaining 18%. The next report is a quarterly analysis and a year-over-year comparison report of change. Again, just to kind of give you a visual representation of how we perform financially over the course of the year. There are several percentages that are high, but all can be explained. As you can see, during quarter one, our revenue exceeded our expenses. In quarter two, which was December through February, our revenue was slightly lower than our expenditures. And again, we historically see a slight dip in our revenue during the winter months and an increase in our revenue during the spring and summer months. Quarter three covers the months of March through May, which we're currently in, and as you can see, in March, our revenue exceeded our expenses by $334,000. The year-over-year percentage of change is also displayed on the far right. This is comparing our year-to-date activity, September through March of 2022, to our FY21 activity of the same period. And if we take a look at our license fee revenue, it is 6.3% less than what it was as of March 31st of 2021. And the overall revenue is 4.5% less than what we collected as of March 2021. And as Director Sample mentioned in her report, our new application percentage is 6.7% lower than what it was last year. Also, our FY22 renewal percentage for sales agents and brokers is at 82.6%, whereas of March 2020, it was 83.48. So since our licensing fees make up 90% of our revenue, any deviation in this category is going to have an overall effect of our revenue. And when it comes to our expenditures, I totally expect to see all of these categories exceed the previous year. During FY21, we were still primarily remote. We didn't begin to travel and do things like that until May of 2021, and here it is, FY22, when we've been hitting the ground running full speed. So I expect for just about every category in our expenditures to be more this year than they were last year. Okay. Moving on to page 42. This just gives you a simple view of our monthly activity and how our revenue collection compares to our expenses. On the left side of the chart is the current year, and on the right side of the chart is FY21. On page 43, we will begin going over our holdings report. The TREC operating account had one security that matured and was reinvested, and we have an ending balance of $13.3 million. Page 44, the real estate recovery account had one security that matured and was reinvested. We had $454,000 reserved for potential payments within the next 90 days, and $3.6 million as the remaining balance. On page 45, The real estate inspection recovery account has a balance of $596,337 and no pending payments. As a reminder, since that balance was over $600,000, we were required to transfer any amount in excess of that $600,000 by December 31st. That transfer to the state general revenue fund was completed, and that was for $23,459.56. Thus, we have a remaining balance of the $596,000 that's in the account as of March 31st. This concludes the Financial Services Division reports. Do we have any questions?
Any questions?
Yes. I'm hearing you correctly. Revenue is down and expenses are up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I own a small business, so I'm not concerned with that. It's just we got to get ahead of it, as we talked about in the budget meeting. But have we looked at alternative ways to increase our income, maybe? And it is a ask that very few people want to talk about, is increasing our fees. When the last time that we had a fee increase?
If I recall correctly, sir, in my notes, TREC has not seen a fee increase in certain categories since 2014, and we've decreased fees. But we had, we were directed by Sunset to make some changes because of our fund balance that we had at the time. And our spending is intentional at this moment. We were directed to reduce that fund balance and to make sure that we don't have any more than 20% over our operations and contingency balance available in that fund balance. And so we have to limit, it's a fund balancing act. And so at this point, we are exceeding our revenue, but we do have a plan as we move forward, 23, 24, 25, to get to a more balanced budget approach. Yes, ma'am.
At this time of year, is it typical for the budget to be where it is historically?
Historically, we do see, like I mentioned, the lower revenue collections in the fall, higher in the spring. The spending, I think, is kind of a one-off because of COVID and everything and how we've been remote. And I look forward to seeing some more balancing as we get to a greater sense of normalcy, if that makes sense. Yes, ma'am.
I think that on the revenue side, you spoke, I think you're very, very close to budget and anticipation of what happened last year to this year. Based on what I've seen and what I've studied within the numbers that have been presented, I think we're going to be spot on with respect to revenues, and we can expect at least to match what we did last year and what we've budgeted in the budget committee as well. As far as the expenses, you make a really good point with respect to COVID. We're coming off of 2 years that have not been normal for anyone. And so I think as time goes on, we'll be able to level off and kind of adjust to the normalization of what the true expenditure rate will be. Having said that, we also have a major large project coming on that's kind of skewing the numbers, and we're anticipating, certain expenditures in certain months of that haven't come to fruition, and so because of the process of getting this project completed. And so I think for the most part, what we need to do as a commission, just keep an eye on it and make sure that we can explain what those variances are. But for the most part, I think we're okay.
Thank you, sir.
Other questions? Okay. While you're up, would you go ahead and cover agenda item 26? Are you prepared for 26? I'm sorry. Okay. All right. No, you're good. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Let's go with Steve Rapp, Director of IT.
Good morning, Chair Kestner, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be before you today. Before I get into my report, I would like to respond to one of the questions regarding the sending out of the renewal notices, and if we have the capability of breaking that up. We do have some options, and we'll discuss that as a team later on, discuss those options and, of course, the impacts of those options. As you recall, the IT report presented today shows website utilization and the percentage of applications, renewals, and transactions that occurred online for the month of March 2022. This includes a comparison to the prior fiscal year to date as well. As you can see, website traffic continues to decline slightly, about 2%, while the percentage of applications, renewals, and transactions online have remained consistent with previous months and the prior fiscal year. And page 2 of this report is a graphical representation of those statistics. Any questions before I move on to project updates?
Any questions? Nope.
The only project update where I don't really have anything to add to RAMP. Executive Director Buckholz covered that, but if there's any additional questions, I'm happy to answer those.
So we're waiting to ramp up.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love the puns, by the way.
Yeah.
Keep them coming. I don't get tired of those. We are ramping up. It's an exciting time, and as soon as a vendor is selected, there will be a tremendous amount of activity to kick this project off, and I can't wait. And I'll probably eat those words at some point, but I can't wait to get this rolling finally.
Well, I know as a commission, we're certainly excited to get it started.
Steve, it is a large project that Renata and you talked about, and everybody's excited about it. Being a hub firm myself, what are you doing to, I know you have my hub participation, but do you identify the ethnicity of your hub firms? Because I really would like to, you guys to emphasize black and brown in your hub participation. That's my perfect world. At the end of the day, it's still risky, you have to get it done, but that's my perfect world.
Absolutely, and I know we identify hub participation. I don't know if we drill down to that level. Renata may know better. But what I can tell you is, that's important to the state, that's important to this agency. It's important to me personally that we make sure that the hub vendors are included when and where they can be. So we can certainly, the vendors, some of them use subcontractors as part of the project bid.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we have that information on them, but it's certainly something we can find out.
Well, I think it'll go a long way for the agency, because you just look at the whole hub environment throughout the whole state. It's a need. I have a foundation called the Mike Williams Assist for Life Foundation, where we train kids from the inner city what goes on outside of their community. So the more we can find leaders within those companies to be a part of something like TREC, I think it'll go a long way, not only now, but in the future.
Agreed. I do know that we do very well in hub participation overall. Renata and I have had these conversations before. She can give you the exact details, but I know that we are ahead of what's required of us, and that's a good place to be in.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. Summer Mandel, Government and Strategic Communications Director. Welcome.
Hi, good morning, Chair Kessner and Commissioners. I've got papers here. Everyone else has their tablets, but I guess I'm a little old school. So I'm excited to share with you all today a communications campaign, what I'm calling CPN 101, that had excellent engagement and results from those who follow us on social media and get our emails. So as y'all know, an updated consumer protection notice went into effect April 1st. The change to the CPN was minor. It removed a reference to home warranty companies, since we no longer regulate those. Those are now regulated by the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. So all license holders must provide the CPN readily noticeable on their business websites, in their business offices, and on social media platforms they use for their business. And we know that many license holders work very hard to follow the rules and regulations that TREC puts forth. But they can only do that well if we provide them with clear and useful information. So with that in mind, rather than merely tell folks there's a new CPN, I worked with Deputy General Counsel Abby Lee over here and Director of Enforcement Michael Malloy to write an article called 3 Places You May Need to Update Your Consumer Protection Notice. And that breaks down all the details on who, what, when, where, how, and especially in depth about the social media platforms, because that can be a little bit tricky for folks. So in the days after we published that article, TREC started getting tagged in social media posts by license holders who were sharing their CPN, which was very cool. We also went viral, I would say, by TREC Facebook standards on the shares and engagement on the post about it. So typically we have about 1,000 to 1,500 engagements, post views for a typical Facebook post. This is actually here in the document, but it was like 15,000. This is something wild. Oh, no, there we go. 12,419 impressions for the Facebook post. So that's pretty high. So of course the data in your packet gives you some more metrics on that successful reach of the campaign, which included the article on the website, social media, and in TREC Advisor. And one cool note about TREC Advisor, historically the most popular link, or the second most popular link, is disciplinary actions. But for the March 25th issue, the most popular link was the CPN article, followed by an article on updated experience requirements for obtaining a broker's license. And then the third was the wholesaling survey results article. So that's very exciting. So I wanted to see how this compared to maybe other times or ways that we communicated about the consumer protection notice, because it's been updated before. The last time it was updated was February 2021. There was a brief article on the website. It was updated consumer protection notice now required. It was basic information. It wasn't as in-depth as the article that we just pushed out. And it was in email communications, but I couldn't really find any metrics on that. So I went to Google Analytics to look at the metrics for visits to that page, that article page, and then visits to the new article page. And I used a 42-day time span, simply because that was how long the new one had been posted when I worked on this report. So from March 9th, the day the new article was posted, to April 20th, the day I compiled this information, Google Analytics shows that we had 13,525 page views for that CPN article. And then if we go back to the 2021 article, that one had 2,030 page views. So that was from February 1st to March 15th. So I'm excited about this campaign. I wanted to share this specifically with y'all because I think it's a good example of a successful strategic communications campaign that really anticipated what users, readers, stakeholders might need to know. And also it motivated them to act, as seen by, real data and also just anecdotal being tagged all over the place. I think if we can gain this kind of traction with this very small change to the CPN notice and get people to act, then just imagine what we can do when we do other strategic communications campaigns. So I've been at the commission now for 5 months, and it's clear to me that license holders seek out TREC for trustworthy information and also make use of that. So I think we're in a great position to really grow that engagement and provide people with useful info. So this concludes my communications report. I'm happy to answer y'all's questions.
Commissioner Wilkinson.
I want to compliment you on the work you've done. I'm a visual learner, and it's so great to see these visuals, and I think a lot of people are. So you've done a great job in your 5 months. We compliment you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Anybody else? I will just add, anytime we have a webinar or interview or whatever, you are huge as far as getting information we might need for that. So thank you for that. And y'all, that's kind of behind the scenes you don't necessarily see, but when we do like the webinar last week, she just provided a ton of information for us to have in case it came up. So we appreciate that.
You're
Great
welcome.
job.
Thank you.
Okay, that finishes the staff reports. We're going to jump to agenda item number 27. Gary Mailer with the Research Center is here, and he's going to give us an update. And I told him we would try to get him on as close to 11 as possible, and this is about as close as possible. So, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here. Thank you. My name is Gary Mailer. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Real Estate Research Center. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot of friends on this commission, so good to see you again, Mark. It's been a lot of years. Thank you for having me today. She's passing out some things. One is a little book that we put together. The center has moved, and to help educate the group of people that we work with now at the university, I put together several of these things. One is a roadmap showing our success, our road to success, the things that we think we need to have in place to pull that off. And then there's a small little 3x5 card that basically is the center's strategic plan, of the strategic initiatives that we're using to advance the center and what we're trying to do, and the principles that guide us. It's been an exciting time. The last 2 years were more than exciting. They were draining, actually, not just because of the pandemic, but because of all the changes at the university. We had so much turnover in leadership within Mays Business School and also at the university. And with all of that came the usual kinds of change on top of all the other changes we had. Ironically, it was really interesting to see that our productivity went up during the pandemic. When we started working from home, people weren't wasting all that time commuting back and forth, and we actually got more done, and we innovated more new products. It was sort of like a booster shot for us. It was interesting how that turned out. I'm very proud of the group and what they did. But things do change, and we have a new president. She's very aggressive. She intends to make the university the preeminent university in the nation. And she's serious about that. A&M is currently the second largest by enrollment. It's about number 10 in terms of public schools, in terms of research dollars, and 12th overall. So she wants to be number one in that arena. And you know what? She might pull it off. She might actually pull it off. Part of that, though, included some restructuring, which would reallocate resources, and that didn't fit us very well since our resources come from the industry. So we left Mays Business School to avoid that, and we're now become part of a new entity on campus, headed by a very capable young lady. I say young lady. She's younger than me, and that doesn't take much to do that anymore. But she's very bright, and she has a long background in reaching out to communities and public. That's something refreshing, I think, to see at the university and other universities. They're beginning to realize that the general public does not relate very much to basic research, theoretical research. So they're putting more emphasis on doing things that actually they can communicate with the people and show them how this actually makes a difference in their lives. And that's what this whole new vision at the university is for. It's called the Division of Academic and Strategic Collaborations, and the real focus is on communities throughout the state of Texas. And of course, that's what we've been doing for years at the center, is doing applied research. So it's a great fit for us. I'm really excited about it. I'll get with actually meet with the vice president and a couple other people in tomorrow. And I often joke about a university the size of Texas A&M. I often say it's like hitting an elephant in the butt with a fly swatter. It doesn't jump very far and usually backs up and deposits something on you. But in this case, they actually have moved in our direction, and we're really glad about that. And so I'm happy with that. The center's I think it's the best fit we've ever had at the university. So that's an exciting thing for us, I think. Dr. Banks, the new president, said when people have a question, she wants them to turn to Texas A&M for real answers. And so, again, that's what we do. And Dr. Balabina, they actually brought their first new regent to visit us. That's never happened before. They get a brand new regent, and they bring them by to see us because they're proud of what we do. So, like I say, I'm really excited about the future for the center. I've highlighted a number of things on this little card here that you've got, but I want to talk about a couple. There's a couple of things we really put a big emphasis on. More proprietary research. The center does some really unique research because we cut research deals with private groups to get data that other people don't have access to. And it's deep and really valuable data. An example would be the Data Relevance Project that we work with the Texas Realtors on. We only have access to that data. It's still their data, but we have access to it so we can do research that can't be done anywhere else. And they also do the same thing on rural land. In fact, we just had our Outlook for Texas Land Markets Conference last week, and we set a new record. Over 560 people attended that conference in San Antonio. They were on fire. The markets have been on fire, as you may know, in land markets, as the housing market has been. And related to that, one of the biggest pushes that we have is a young lady that's on our staff. Claire Losey is doing a lot of research. In fact, she's developed a full model for assessing and analyzing housing markets so she can address housing affordability. That's one of our biggest pushes going forward. It's sorely needed. She's working directly with the municipal league, not only the private sector, but the public sector side, to look at these issues, and she's reached out and working with communities all across Texas. She was going to be in Kingsville last week, but had an illness in her family and wasn't able to do that. But Claire is doing some great work for us, and that's a huge area for us. The other personal thing that I want to do is I'm trying to get some more talent on board to round out our capabilities in the commercial area of real estate. We've always been strong in land and in residential, both single family and multifamily, but I really want to make a big push into doing more research on the commercial side. And of course that's driven, and we're limited more than anything else by access to quality data in that arena. We're working on that right now, and I've got a couple of people in mind that I've been working with to try to get them on board. If that doesn't work, I'll go another direction, but those are the things that are going on at the center. I know you'd like for me to really talk a little bit about the economy and what we think is going to happen. And I'll be right up front with you. We don't know what's going to happen. No one does. If they tell you they do, they're a liar. They just are. We don't have any experts that have a grasp on everything that's going on in the world and in the nation at this current time. We've just emerged, as you know, from a crazy situation with the pandemic. We've seen how consumers have responded. They've been like they've gotten out of jail. They got an out of jail card and they've gone out and they started spending money and loving the fact that they've got freedom again, and it's showing up in the markets in all kinds of ways. But don't believe the experts because they don't know. There's all kinds of opinions within the center. We've got guys who are perma-bears that think the world's going to go in hell in a handbasket next week. And we've got other things are going to be fine for a long time. So we're divided within the House about what we think is going on. I'll tell you my conclusion right up front, and I'll repeat it before I get through. My head tells me things will return to some degree of normalcy, but there's also something in my gut and in my heart that says, you know, we flipped a switch. Texas is a cool place. They discovered our Mexican food. They haven't tasted our weather yet, but I think Texas, it may be different going forward for us. I think we may moderate. We may have a little struggle here and there, but long term, things have changed in Texas, and they may have changed forever. They may really have. I mean, think about that. We're in fact, one of the leading states in terms of growth. And we've got all kinds of data that we've acquired in future data. We've actually acquired that for the entire nation. We can look at every state and look at migration patterns in and out of those states and into Texas, and the migration that occurred into those states as well, and where it came from, and I'll share with you some of those insights today. The country, of course, as you well know, even here in Texas, is ideologically divided like we've never been. That keeps us from addressing public policy in strong ways, that's for sure. We're experiencing the highest level of inflation we've experienced in 40 years. That's a challenge for the economy. That's a challenge for people who are on the, I mean, you go out and, I shop. I lost my wife a few years ago, but I always did the grocery shopping. But you go in the grocery store and the ticket is, 20% to 30% more than what you were paying just 6 months or a year ago. So we're all experiencing that. We're all in that boat. And it's going to have an impact on us in the short and in the long term. We've got a startling level of crime in our major urban centers. And I read some numbers the other day that were shocking to me. There were 5.5 million new gun owners and new purchasers of guns in the United States last year, and over half of those were women because of fear of crime. It's amazing when you think about that. That changes things too. It changes the way we live, the way we act, the way we do everything. Supply chain disruptions. I heard one of the best presentations I've ever heard on this. One of the hottest real estate markets today is the industrial and logistics side of things. Warehousing. Warehousing will come into their own again. Just-in-time delivery is dying. People realize they've got to stockpile goods. They can't wait to just-in-time because just-in-time may be a long, long time. So that's changing everything. It's impacting housing costs. It's impacting the time it takes to build a house. I had a friend who built a brand new custom home. It took him 8 months to get a range for his house. 8 months to get a range to cook in his house. Yeah. Someone's shaking their head over there. Let's see. Yeah. It's strange. I mean, it really is having really disruptive, it's a really disruptive factor in our economy. And it really is repudiating the whole idea of globalization when you think about it, the fact that we could depend upon other countries to look out for our best interest in an economic environment. I mean, you still got to maintain some capability to be strategically positioned so that you don't suffer these kinds of things. And I think it's proving that out for us. And certainly we have some bad actors on the international stage. We got a war in the Ukraine that may, in fact, threaten world peace. And so that's changing things as well. There are a lot of these things that are going on. And for a decade and a half, we've ignored Joseph Schumpeter's rule about the economy is that you let the weak entities fail. You let weak companies and weak banks and people who make really sorry decisions, you let them suffer the consequences of that. But we've ignored that for decades now. And so what is the Fed having to do now? Instead of all that loose money that they've done, they're having to readjust and they're having to address inflation. Guess how many times in recent history they've achieved a soft landing when they've tried to address inflation? How many times? Anyone? One time in 1994 and 1995. They achieved it one time. One time. One time in our recent history. Now, it may go back a lot more than I've read, but one time. One time. So it's shocking to me when you think about that. So that tells us that we could be facing a recession. Some would maintain that we're in a recession right now. All it takes is one more quarter and we'll be officially in a recession if that occurs. But the Federal Reserve is doing what they can do, and they don't have many bullets left, do they? Texas on fire. As I mentioned, migration is coming into Texas. Austin, Texas attracted the most people from Los Angeles, that's where they came from, into this metro area. Houston actually attracted more Californians overall, interestingly enough. Houston and Dallas, Fort Worth, but Dallas in particular, Dallas and Houston, almost 45% of their population growth, which was substantial over the last decade, has come from foreign immigration, believe it or not. And the rest of the metros in Texas, the bulk of their population growth came from natural increase, births over deaths, plus domestic migration, about 16%. So that gives you some feel for where people come from, where they go to, and where they settle in Texas. And that has an impact as well on both the culture, everything, restaurants, choices of housing, clothing, everything else. Years ago, and I want to repeat this study, we engaged the Harris Poll people and we did a study on home buying among ethnic groups, and it was amazing to look at. We looked at Asians, Hispanics, and Anglos, and the black population. And we conducted that study in Spanish as well. There were too many Asian languages for us to do that in all those languages, far too cost prohibitive for us. But it was an amazing study, and I hope to repeat that in coming years as we start to look at this, because it's becoming, as we look at those groups, it's important to know how different groups of people approach the process, what they expect, and what's important to them. It was interesting to me as I think about that the Hispanics placed, I think like we all should, place the most value on relationships. They wanted to be near people that they had a relationship with, family and friends. Fascinating when you get into those kinds of things. Well, Texas is now, almost 29 million plus 150,000 on top of that, and still growing. But about half the counties in the state lost population, believe it or not. And it's kind of a bifurcated market if you think about it. What happened is those counties, those cities, little small towns that are within the exurbs or the suburban markets, they grew even more than the urban areas did. So we had a sort of a reversal in a sense. I guess you would count it part of the MSA in some cases they were outside the MSA. But if you go back to 2011 and you look forward to 2021, about 10% of the people who bought homes in small towns in 2021, it went up to 16% in 2011, and it went up to 2021 to 16%, an increase of 10%. So significant change. Those kind of numbers, I mean 6 to 10% numbers, those are fairly significant numbers when you look at changes in the marketplace. Roughly half the home buyers who bought homes last year found them on the internet. That's where they went, first place they went to look for a home. So they found the home they eventually bought on the internet. They may have gone and worked with an agent to get that house, but they found that home on the internet to start with. Housing prices have been driven by herd mentality. Land prices, same thing, herd mentality, meaning get under the tent flap while you can before it's too late, right? Before they get up out of reach. And so we've seen a lot of that mentality in the marketplace. In 2022, our economy nationally and in the state is starting out slower than it did in 2021. In 2021, the U.S. economy grew by 5.7%. Right now it's growing at about 2%. Again, depends on who you talk to in my shop, 3 to 5%, somewhere in that range by the end of the year. We'll see. As of February, the U.S. economy had recovered all but about 1.2 million jobs, 2.1 million jobs. I always reverse that number for some reason, but 2.1 million jobs. But that doesn't tell the whole story. Our unemployment is currently at, I think it's about, what is it? Let me think about this a moment, 3.8%. But U6, which is a broader measure of unemployment, which includes people who are underemployed and people who were forced by the economy into part-time jobs, and also some other definitions that only a government employee could understand, those people bring that number up to more like 7.6 to 7% unemployment. So it's still not completely back to where we want to be. There are 11 million jobs that are open. And guess how many people are unemployed? 6.5 million. So there are more jobs than there are people who are unemployed. And that's a result of something we call the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation is reversing a little bit. You know why? Inflation. It's a wake-up call. People are saying, oops, I think I retired too soon. I'm going to run out of money, so I'm going to have to go back to work. So we're seeing some of that in the marketplace as well. Alternative work location. It looks like a hybrid model is going to be the future of work, where people will work some from home and some from the office. Some people will work all the time from home. Some will continue to work from the office exclusively. I had several people who just refused to work from home. Even though the university was trying to make them work from home, they still came into the office every day. Maybe the kids are crazy. I don't know. They came to work. They came to work. And so, but it has shifted. And a little bit of the power has shifted from employers to employees too, when you think about that. And so as you look at buildings that we build for employees now, we're having to do things in buildings that attract people to come back to the office. It's a change. It's a major change architecturally and for developers and others as we look at the future of work in our country and in our state. Housing demand, this is the biggest constraint on the housing market and on the number of licensees and everything else, is the fact that housing demand greatly exceeds supply. It has for a long time. It continues to be the result of that. And that's partly a result of skilled labor shortages, hangover from the Great Recession, lost capacity in that. I had several friends who were with major home building companies, and they had cut back their companies 2/3 during the Great Recession. You think about that lost capacity, how long it takes to build back that expertise. All those lumber mills that shut down, those entities, those material suppliers and others that went out of business back then, it takes time to build that back, and we haven't fully built that back. And in fact, we lost a lot of that labor to other professions that paid more money, notably the oil patch. For a while there, we were draining people from the construction industry out into the oil patch. And of course, that's reversed some, but still, There's the NIMBY regs locally, there's escalating land costs, immigration from other states that I've already talked about are driving up the demand in the state. So a lot of things are causing, and even the conversion from what would normally be single-family supply to rentals by builders, new homes in particular, are changing the marketplace as well. Home prices are up double digits just about everywhere, but here's where we really see the sharpest increases. And we have something, again, because of the data we work with through the realtors organizations all throughout the state. We do repeat sales analysis now, where we can look at the same house over time as it sells repeatedly over time. And that really does tell you what the appreciation rate was. Otherwise, when you're looking at median numbers, you're looking at whatever's in the marketplace for sale. That doesn't say a whole lot about appreciation. It just talks about what's on the market at any given point in time. So the markets with the leading areas in that area are Austin with the sharpest increase, followed by Dallas, then Fort Worth, then San Antonio. And Houston lags the market just because of the impact earlier on in the last couple of years in the oil patch. And that's coming back now a little bit, but not much, because the lenders are still a little bit shy. They got burned a little bit by what happened in the past. So we have 1 month's supply of housing in the statewide. Isn't that crazy? 1 month's supply, 1 month's supply. And in fact, it's been 10 years since we've had a balanced market. A balanced market in our sense is 5 months of supply. That happened back in 2012. Housing sales are up 6.1% in 2021. Obviously more in some markets, but the average price is up 16.1%. Now again, that's because of all the cost inputs into the housing market and the demand factor. And the price per square foot is up 19.6%, almost 20%. So that shows you inflation again is running at 20% in the housing market as well. It's been 16 years since we built enough houses to match the demand. And it was another 16-year cycle before that we did the same thing, interestingly enough. I don't think that's a new rule and a law in the economy, but it's certainly something worth noting that happened. And as I said, personally, I think we may have flipped a switch in Texas. I think things may moderate. It may get a little tough for a little while, but I don't think we're in for too many rough roads in Texas unless something really unforeseen happens on the horizon. And I'll take any questions from you now at this time if you have any.
Any questions?
Yes, I agree with you on the supply and demand, but it's also kind of skewed because the value of the dollar, with the influx of dollars coming into the market throughout the United States, that's 16%. The value of the dollar is decreased anyway. So when we start thinking about dollars, everybody think you're making more money, but you're really not, because the loaf of bread is 20% higher.
Yeah, well, that's why inflation has changed.
Yeah, so when we start thinking about the real estate market and what do we need to do, it goes back to our agency. We have got to start really looking at what are we doing within this agency to increase our costs for people to do business with us, our agents, because we've got to keep up with the market itself. That's just a thought. Okay. Thank you.
There is one interesting thing, since you touched on that. When we looked at that migration data, we looked at we could actually track those people, who they were, where they bought. And overall, if you looked at the entire state, people from high income states, high home price states, did not have that much impact on the price of homes in Texas. Now, they had an impact, don't get me wrong. But in other words, to say that they bid up the prices was incorrect in most markets. In some markets, parts of Austin in particular, parts of Dallas in particular, they did have a huge impact, and they did bid up the price. But here's what happened. People had more money in their pocket, even first-time buyers, money from relatives, inheritances, selling cryptocurrency at a big increase, and federal stimulus dollars. Federal stimulus dollars were in their hands. So all those things played into the market to jump prices. Thanks for having me today.
Commissioner Woodruff?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gary,
Mark?
Gary, that was excellent. I have one question for you. What are the rising long-term rates? What's your view of what that may do to our demand?
It's a perception thing, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
back when I built my house, I designed and built my own house. I'm an architect. I had a 12.5% ARM, okay, adjustable rate mortgage. And I was scared to death. I mean, that was a lot of money back then, you know, paying that kind of rate. It went down, thank goodness. I mean, right after I got the loan, it started going down. Could have gone the other way. We've been accustomed to what, 2-something% interest rates, and now we're looking probably at 5 or maybe 5.5%, 6%. Those old guys, we think in terms of, we saw a survey the other day, we think in terms of 6% being 6 to 8% being the normative range, but the younger people think in terms of 4.
Well, yeah,
and so
it's
it
a
may be a
paradigm.
shock to this younger group, and I think they may be a psychological barrier for them, where 10 or 12% was a psychological barrier to me.
And then we're already dealing with affordability issues because
Right.
of rising prices. So when you layer,
Right.
you know, the
Every
math starts
$1,000
getting-
increase
yeah.
knocks out 19,000 households from the market.
Every quarter point. I'm sorry.
Every $1,000 increase in the housing price knocks out 19,000 households in Texas from the home buying market. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, over the last 2 or 3 months, I couldn't pick up a magazine or a newspaper that didn't have the Research Center reference, but they're writing the article, and I remember when you were just in such a different state. So your research is quite prolific and very highly thought of, and it's a pleasure to have you associated.
Thank you. Our biggest challenge is recruiting talent. Quite frankly, we've not done a very good job of cranking out PhDs. People are not staying in college. And there's a shortage of those guys and gals. And so I'm scouring the nation, literally looking for talent. We've had several key people retire. One guy got lured away by the Fed. So old guys like me are hanging around a lot longer than I planned to. Thank you again for having me today.
All right, thank you. Okay, I show it is 11:30. We're going to take a short, let's say 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Let's do 10 minutes, okay? So we will re-adjourn at 11:40. To order at 11:44. We're on agenda item number 6, Executive Committee. Executive Committee reports are in your handout, page 49, 50, 51, and 52. Just to kind of recap some of the stuff we talk about. I always talk about full-time employees. I always talk about hold times. I always talk about email returns. Also talk about, you know, the complaint process, how to decrease the time frame for complaints. Talk about the impact of online complaints. Talk about maybe a better way to answer complaints. We talked. It's in your notes. You know, is there a form letter? Does the form letter go into enough detail to actually give an accurate, you know, description of why the complaint was answered or not answered? Always talk about ideas and formats for workshops, consumer service survey, and then 1 month we had some discussion on the recovery fund. Legislative year, you know, is the recovery fund limits where they need to be. It's $50,000 per transaction, $100,000 per agent, and that was established in 1992. So we just kind of take everything going on and kind of talk about it and try to set it up. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and if you look at the minutes and have any questions, any notes, or any input, we will certainly, you know, we certainly want to hear it, okay? I will now ask Commissioner Pena to do the audit report, agenda item number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Audit Committee met on April the 5th, kind of our first internal audit committee ever, since we are a newly formed committee, and basically we just talked about the overall roles of the committee members as well as the auditor and management. And as we execute the internal audit plan, we did talk about the current audit plan and its status, and hopefully we'll have an update when we are able to meet with them here shortly between now and the next commission meeting to find out what the delivery of their annual report, so to speak. And also we talked about the RFQ process for the upcoming FY 2023 year internal audit. I think we're up for renewal on our, to go out for qualifications on those services as well. Pretty neat. I think we're going to have a great committee. We're off to a great start. The involvement of the Audit Committee would be very applied. We want to be involved in the way the risk assessment process goes and how the direction and what direction we give to our internal auditors for them to look at. So we're really excited about that.
All right, any questions? All right, agenda item number 7, report by Budget Committee, Commissioner Williams.
We had 2 meetings, actually, one on April 7th and a follow-up on the 18th. CFO Williams presented the first fiscal year budget for 2023. We truly understand the cost of living. So it was 2 things that we really wanted to get in place. One was going to balance the budget. Commissioner Pena said that was very important as it relates to the Sunset Group. We want to make sure that we get ahead of that. But the most important thing, we understand the cost of living. So for 2023, we recommended that we increase our merit allowances from 3% to 5% for staff. But it's only on this 1 year, and we're going to look at it on a year-to-year basis. Ms. Williams highlighted 3 other key points: was the RAMP project, and additional full-time employees, and switch from leasing to purchasing equipment. April 18th was really a short follow-up to see what that would look like when we increased the employees from 3% to 5%, and the Budget Committee report and the CFO Williams will present the overview of the fiscal year and the future agenda item.
All right, any questions? Okay, now I'm going to go to agenda item number 26 and ask Chief Financial Officer Renata Williams to go over the upcoming budget.
Good morning again. Agenda item 26, discussion and possible action regarding the FY23 draft budget. You should have received the budget under separate cover. It has this front cover page. Okay. The first draft of the FY23 budget proposal is presented as a 3-year budget, and it's important to note that the first year, labeled Proposed 2023, is the only year intended to be adopted in August, while the projected 24 and 2025 are to be considered as a forecast. Key highlights in the budget, which Commissioner Williams just went over: there's an increase in salary and wages to account for an increase in our staff by 11 full-time equivalents. There's a detailed narrative about each position found on page 8 of the budget document. But those positions, we're going to have 1 position allotted for the Customer Relations Division for training specialists, 2 for our licensing division for license and permit specialists to help with processing the applications in the renewals, given that our TREC license holder count has increased to 226,619. 1 program specialist for our education department to assist with the education audits and compliance reviews, 1 document service technician to assist with our mailroom, and 6 positions are dedicated to our enforcement division to help reach our goal to have timely complaint resolution. And those positions include 2 attorneys, 2 investigators, and 2 legal assistants. In addition, the budget also allows for an increase in the merit allowance for staff, increasing from a 3% to a 5% merit, and that's to account for inflation. And it's important to note that this increase is considered a one-time increase and will be evaluated in the subsequent years to determine sustainability based off of the agency's revenue. Another highlight is that we are going to see an increase in our professional fees and services to reflect the projected expenditures for our regulatory applications modernization project, or RAMP. We're nearing the stages where we're about to have a contract award between now and the end of August, and we should start seeing some expenditures related to this project. We will also see a slight increase in commissioner and staff travel to accommodate quarterly meetings, workshops, trainings, and industry-related conference attendance. You'll also notice Equipment rental has decreased as we shift to purchasing laptops instead of leasing laptops. This shift also means that there's an increase in our supplies and equipment category to support the purchase of those equipment. The draft budget has been thoroughly reviewed by the Budget Committee, and staff has incorporated all of their recommendations. We will continue to work closely together and prepare a final draft for the Commission's approval in August. Staff recommendation, there's no action needed at this time, as this is just a first draft that we wanted to present to you to let you know that we have gone through the process with the Budget Committee and have incorporated all of their recommendations.
Any questions? I, for one, appreciate the draft budget. I appreciate the breakdown, the explanations of where you're going, and I really appreciate getting it this early in the process.
Yes, sir.
Gives everybody ability to have input. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Moving on, agenda item number 8, General Counsel Vanessa Burgess will present report on unauthorized practice of law working group, followed by the broker lawyer committee report. Good morning.
Good morning. Agenda item 8 is the report from the Unauthorized Practice of Law Working Group. This is a group that was started at the suggestion of some public comments that were received related to this topic. The suggestion to form the group came out of the Broker Lawyer Committee, who took a look at those comments. And I will also say this is an area where the general counsel inbox, we receive a lot of questions on this. And some of that is because everyone wants a specific answer. Well, what is the unauthorized practice of law? And that's a hard position to take because there are so many ways it can happen. There's not really one set example. But what the idea behind this working group was to get a group together to talk about what does it look like, how does it relate to TREC rules, TREC education, TREC messaging, things like that. So that group has actually met twice since the last commission meeting. And its focus has been truly on ways to improve TREC Rule 537.11, and that's the rule that pertains to the TREC contract forms, and also it's the rule that covers the unauthorized practice of law. So specifically, the group has looked at language regarding the principle-based direction of changing language in a contract form, with a particular focus on the definition of, and you'll know this, they seem to go hand in hand, factual statements and business details. And in fact, they may go more hand in hand as this group progresses. But they're looking at maybe clarifying some of the definitions in there. And also looking at everyone's favorite section of the TREC contract forms, from what I can tell, from what I hear from folks, which is the special provisions section, a section that can be, as I understand it, problematic. And so really looking at, what are those factual statements and business details? How do they relate to special provisions? And is there anything that could be done? This would be a little bit of a joint effort between the Broker Lawyer Committee and this working group to get some more clarity there and provide a better contract form, maybe better is not, but work to improve what that looks like, what that means, and where we can protect the consumer in that regard. So there's also some other ideas that have been presented with regard to those two topics, and that includes discussion relating to a possible notice to consumers regarding the unauthorized practice of law and what our license holders can and cannot do. And that would be an outward-facing document that would let the consumer know. It would also allow an agent or broker to be able to say, hey, we have rules. This document explains the rules as it relates to the unauthorized practice of law, and perhaps be a potential tool. So that's being floated around. And any change like that would need to be made, like I said this earlier, in conjunction with a change to TREC contract forms, possibly, and that would go with the Broker Lawyer Committee. So the work here is really going to go hand in hand with Broker Lawyer Committee, and we've been providing reports at Broker Lawyer Committee related to this group, and they will continue to meet with the goal of ultimately providing recommendations to both Broker Lawyer and the full commission on this topic. This is not a fast-moving process because the level of thought and detail that needs to go into changes like this is pretty tremendous. There's also some discussion about what could TREC put out in terms of education, where could it fit into the courses, into Legal 1, Legal 2, for example. So it's an ongoing conversation. It's a pretty all-star group, and we look forward to giving you the report at the next round and also seeing what broker-lawyer feedback we get when we do the report to them. And I'm available to answer any questions.
Any questions? Commissioner Woodruff.
Really a comment. I really like the idea of the consumer notice because I believe that a lot of the things that probably ultimately end up in special provisions, are induced or suggested or inferred or something, and so I think if a real estate agent had that official notice, like we have all kinds of other notices, so I mean, then I think that would make for a easier conversation with a consumer.
Agree. I will just comment, you said it may be problematic only if they put something in it, okay? So
When left blank, fine.
that's right. If we could go from paragraph 9 to paragraph or 10 to 12, it would be easier. Okay. Any other questions? If not, you'll go into broker lawyer.
So agenda item 9 is the report from the Broker Lawyer Committee. The committee met on April 8th, and the attorneys of the group, the ones that are there appointed by the State Bar, they named John George as the attorney co-chair to replace Charles Kramer, and Amy Slusher will serve as the alternate co-chair in the event that John cannot be there. We had a couple of reports from different working groups. Broker Lawyer Committee's got 2 working groups going at the moment. One is the Farm and Ranch Working Group, which consists of some members of Broker Lawyer Committee and also from our alternate member, Charles Porter, who's here. He'll present for ESEC. He's lending his expertise in the area of farm and ranch as well. So there's been some suggestions that have been made by the working group to the full committee, and some of which have been accepted. None of them are before you today, but I just want to cover them in a little bit of detail so that we have this outward-facing report. You'll see it on the website with the Broker Lawyer Committee recap, but just to let folks know, because I think the Farm and Ranch contract in particular is one that people are always asking about and seeking some changes on or wondering what's happening there. So I'll let you know that some of the suggestions that have been accepted by the full committee and which you can expect to see before you at some point would be adding a notice to the top of the contract regarding its intended use, adding a per acre amount for adjustment in paragraph 3D, and then lengthening the line for the description of the land and county to add more room so that you can name multiple counties, which is sometimes something that happens where you'll have the land will cover multiple counties, and this would just allow for that room in the contract form itself. There was another working group. It was of one person, and now it is of more, but we'll call it a working group, that made some other recommendations. So there was the committee took a look at those changes. They agreed to an additional clause to paragraphs 2B2 and 2C2 of the residential condominium contract, stating that the buyer retains rights to terminate under section 82.156 of the property code. And then that working group of 1 has now grown, I believe, to a working group of 3. So I think we'll see some more recommendations out of that group. And they're looking at a few of the different contract forms. So today, before you, you will see some proposed revisions and a new form related to a legislative change regarding flood disclosure and the temporary residential lease. I will not go into the details of those, as Abby will do it later on when she does her marathon run of the rules. But for purposes of this meeting, those will be the formal recommendations out of Broker Lawyer Committee, and no other formal changes are being proposed at this meeting. But we do expect some contract form changes in the near-ish future.
Any questions? All right. Thank you very much. Next, I will ask Charles Porter, Chair of the Education Standards Advisory Committee. Good morning.
Good morning. Commissioners, thank you for having me here. I'll be brief, but we spent a good deal of time as you know, on April 4th, working on the broker responsibility part of the course. We think it's our priority. What we determined was that we don't want a new course, and we looked and basically broke down completely the 30-hour broker responsibility course that exists. We looked at every single page to see where we could find things. I generated, to get started, because you really can't edit a blank page, an outline of considerable revisions we could make. And the way it was we set it up was, we first thought that we ought to look at the Occupation Code and all the TREC rules as a foundation and how they interrelate. Even things as simple as, what's the definition of a sales agent in Texas Occupations Code 1101.002. We want them to understand that in the black letter law and the statutes, 1101.803 talks about the general liability of the broker. The broker is a licensed broker responsible to the commission, the public, and the broker's clients for any conduct engaged in, no matter what kind of LLC and all that thing you set up. We talked about that. We went over in this section of the first 60 minutes we would add to change to improve this broker responsibility course to talk about the rules, 535.2. We want to talk about 535.2D. We still think advertising is a nightmare across the board. You ought to hear Avis Wukash talk about it in our meetings that we see. So in that first part, we want them to have an understanding of the Occupation Code and the rules as the foundation. In fact, I made the statement if I sponsored an agent, they wouldn't want to work for me because they'd have a 3-hole notebook with the Occupation Code and the rules there, and I'd test them every week because I'm responsible for their actions. And that's where it has to come down. Broker responsibility means broker responsibility. So in that first section, we'd add a lot about that. Secondly, we add 2 sections. One, the agent's expectation of the broker, and then the broker's expectation of the agent. We went into great detail about that. Examples, agent expects the broker to support them in their daily work. An agent expects the broker to support them in their education, the complexities. We talk about clear office policies, a long list that we will provide you eventually. Then we talk about the broker's expectation of the agents, that they understand and respect the liability the broker is obligated to and for the agent's conduct, to honor and adhere to all office policies. And again, another 8 or 10 item list that we're going to incorporate into that class, hopefully, that will make them understand. We have a whole section on geographic competency. And as you know, geographic competency is not just topographical maps. It's all kinds of competency. And we talk about the fact that the way the legislature changed that. We talked about the fact that we want to ensure that both agent and broker are geographic competent. There's no way a broker can teach an agent or assess the competency of an agent if they're not competent themselves. For example, a broker that's never done anything but residential work shouldn't be fooling around with commercial work. They don't even understand the difference between net usable, net rentable square footage and usable square footage. Those are the kind of things. So we're going to incorporate into that class. The broker needs to go out and find someone that can teach and assess not only themselves but also the agents. It's going to take a lot of work to do that. The broker has to agree to continually assess the agent's geographical competency. And we heard from some members, if you're an agent that's working in El Paso and Beaumont across the state, that's kind of hard to do. There are different business cultures there across our great variety of our state, diversity. Other liability issues will be another section, which will talk about not only the rules, but also professional understanding of compliance with the duties under 1101 and the rules. And we also thought it was important that they have a working understanding of 1101.652, the entire section that's grounds for suspension or revocation of the license, all the way down to everything involved in that, which, as you know, is quite extensive. We also thought, on the other end, that they should be taught, again, we're not trying to get them to be attorneys, but doggone it, they ought to have a working understanding of the Occupations Code and the rules, right? They ought to have that working understanding so they can communicate with their attorney and understand that language, even down to the point 1101.805, liability for misrepresentation or concealment, how that works against parties. It ties back to the rules and our basic thing. If you had knowledge of some kind of falsity, you need to disclose it. Yet, if you don't have knowledge, you don't have to disclose it. You can't disclose what you don't know. So we took it very, very seriously. Jennifer and her colleagues are helping us work through this. We looked at the finance course, Chairman Kessner, and I frankly, excuse me, being a professor that teaches real estate finance from time to time at St. Edwards, I think it's very weak, but we thought that the appropriate place to make these changes are in the broker responsibility course that's there now. We think that's appropriate. Eventually, we may go back and work and try to bring that finance course up to a level that we should be in now, where we're looking at homes that are selling, if you can believe it, one down the street from me went at $1,250 a square foot. I have no idea why, and it sold in 2 days. It's unbelievable. It's scaring everybody to death. So that's where we are. Secondly, we also feel because of the prices, because of what we're seeing in Austin, Texas, and others, the rental for single-family homes is up to $3,000 and $4,000 and $5,000 a month, which is at a level that it's never been before. And these homes are filling up quickly. The home builders are building subdivisions full of homes purely for rent, which I'd never heard of in my life. So I think the property management aspect of this, which I think Chance will talk about, we need a property management course, help them understand some basics. I understand TREC, we don't get involved in commercial property management nor in apartment management. However, we do get involved in single-family residential management. And when we're at that kind of level of rent, I think you'll see more and more agents involved in property management. I know of some agents that are managing 25 and 30 homes. That is a very difficult thing to do in the world that we live in now. So that's kind of where we are at this point. We're going to continue to work forward. That was from our April 4th meeting. I'm talking fast, so excuse me for that. One last thing I'll say. On the side, I'm on the as an alternate to the Broker Lawyer Committee, I'm on the Farm and Ranch Working Group. You know that I've been studying water for many, many years. We have the most dangerous drought we've had in Texas, much worse than 2011 if you look out everywhere. I'm doing a study down in the lower Rio Grande Valley right now. Delta Lake is down to 13% capacity. It's a nightmare creeping further east. We feel like that there should be a water paragraph in the contracts. It's very complicated to do. Just to give you a quick update on that, it's outside my jurisdiction except as the working group member. The Texas Alliance of Land Brokers have made comments. The Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts have made comments that they need it desperately. They are, of course, the people that manage all our groundwater across the state. They're finding now that developers come in and take developer takes a piece of paper, draw lines, sell off, lots by meets and bounds, and ignore the spacing regulations between groundwater wells. All those things are there. The Texas Water Conservation Association, in a presentation I made the other day, has made it their priority for both their groundwater and surface water committees to advise us in how we can revise our contracts to have a water paragraph, which we've never had. And there's no reason why we shouldn't. So I'll quit talking about it. That's been my passion for a long time, but we absolutely have to have it. So above all else for ESAC, we're going to continue to work on improving the broker responsibility course to where it'll meet what we need in our world today.
Okay.
Real estate brokerage. Real estate brokerage, excuse me.
Broker responsibility is also undergoing.
Yes, I'm sorry. Real estate brokerage course. Yes.
There's a difference. The brokerage is a 30-hour class you must take to get a broker's license. The broker's responsibility is a required class for our brokers and supervisors.
I misspoke.
And both of them are extremely important. And I like the outline and the changes you're looking at the brokerage class.
Yes, the brokerage class.
Other questions? Commissioner Miller.
We as real estate agents and brokers sell the properties residentially that are already on the ground. Are you all talking, or these alliances that you have, also talking to the home builders and the developers? Because if they're going to break a piece of land up into lots, and they're going to expect wells or sewers or water, everything to go in there, agents are going to sell it. So you got to stop stuff going in.
And that's the headache out there in some of the rural areas because it begins so hot. Some of the quote developers don't pay attention. They don't even file a plat for the subdivision. They go out and sell it by meets and bounds. And the groundwater districts, I wrote an article for the A&M Journal years ago analyzing their financial capacity. They don't have the capacity to go out. They don't have the money to go out and do independent research. The Brewster County, for example, out there at Marfa, their total budget last year was $20,000 in gross revenue in their budget. They can hardly have an office open, but it is a tremendous problem, Commissioner Miller. And somehow the counties need to say, look, you can't keep doing this and calling it a subdivision. But
And
that's
the
all about
counties
enforcement.
want the money.
That's right. And they're putting in, they don't even analyze, they don't even pay attention to the septic rule regulations. They allow each one of these little lots, quote lot, to do a septic tank, and it's a nightmare in some western parts of the state. And we need to be watching that also.
I think it's headed east, real fast.
Yes.
All right, any other questions?
Just a great job that you are doing as chair, as the other chairs are doing as well on those committees. You and Chance working together on this is great to see.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wilkins. Anybody else?
All right.
Thank you.
Next up, Chance Brown, Chair of Broker Responsibility Working Group. Welcome, Chance.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you very much, or I guess good afternoon now. Happy to be here. On April 13th, the Broker Responsibility Working Group did meet. Before I get into our rule recommendations from that meeting, I do want to take a second just to thank staff, because we had a really deep discussion on how rules get made and how statutes get changed and things like that. And without fully breaking out the I'm Just a Bill video that we all watched in 8th grade, we really got an in-depth education on how all of that part of y'all's job, frankly, works. And so thank you very much for that. We appreciate you. Since Charles teed it up for me, we'll talk a little bit about property management. We have been in discussions the last couple of our meetings on how to, in some way, shape, or form, ensure that licensees engaging in property management know property management, which is a very involved process. There's a lot more code than sometimes being a broker. And so the concern obviously being that as the attractiveness of increasing rents presents itself to agents and potentially sales are coming harder and harder to come by, they'll start engaging in property management and do so in a way that doesn't benefit a consumer in any way, shape, or form. And so we have collected some thoughts on that. We're working on it. We're probably going to be collaborating with ESAC on creating some new education or revising some existing education in order to make sure that if somebody is going to engage in property management, they do so properly. The two big discussions in our group on April 13th, I'll start with the really easy one, the one that was unanimously and very excitedly adopted and is being proposed to you as a rule change, is to mirror the language in 535.2 that requires a broker to respond to parties of a transaction and any other stakeholder within 2 calendar days to all licensees. As this market has heated up, we just hear it all the time that we're not hearing from people. And that's, A, unprofessional, but B, it really puts the consumer in a position of what the heck's going on, and we don't know. And so that would be one of our recommendations to you today is a rule recommendation, obviously not in 535.2, but separately, and that's why Abby gets paid the big bucks, to put a rule somewhere that mirrors that same language. The second discussion, which was a much longer and more lively discussion, was how do we ensure proper supervision and mentoring of agents when they participate in a real estate activity for the first time? Currently, 535.2 states that a broker has to only supervise somebody when they engage in a new real estate activity for the first time. Now, I know personally that the first time I did any real estate activity, I was not proficient in that activity after that. And I sure as heck wasn't in the first one. And I had a pretty good broker. And so we felt like there needed to be more to that. And after a very lengthy discussion, the elegant solution to this is to place a number between first and time. And so what we have proposed to this group is that 535.2 subsection I be amended to read the first 3 times that a licensee engages in a new activity. And so that was the majority of our meeting. moving forward, we are going to be looking still on the property management issue, but also looking at different types of brokerage license, how we deal with broker associates versus sponsoring brokers, and then also returning to our work now that the form has been simplified, at looking at leveling the playing field on education versus experience points and the potential imbalance there. With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Commissioner Miller.
After that meeting, I started asking around, and 3 is not at all uncalled for, and everybody agrees with that. But my question comes down to, what's a new activity? Because is it a buy or is it a sell? And you've got 2 activities, and that counts as 2, or does that count just as 1?
I would say that are you talking about if you're representing both sides or if you're doing one or the other? Because I would say representing a buyer is an activity, whereas representing a seller is a separate activity.
Okay, so that would count as 2.
Same thing with landlord or tenant, same thing with farm and ranch or commercial or you name it.
So they just need 1 more.
Well, no, ma'am, I think that it would be the first 3 times that they do that activity. So it wouldn't be in total, right? So if you're representing a buyer, it would be 3 times representing a buyer, 3 times representing a seller, 3 times representing a tenant.
That's going to have to be clarified with definitions and all that, and again, who's going to police it?
So those are 6 activities.
Well, I mean, ultimately, if we're going to be completely frank on this, the hard part of coming up with a rule like this is that at the end of the day, it's reactionary because it's going to rely on complaints to be enforced. That's the tough part.
General Counsel Burgess, did you have something?
I was just going to note that these 2 recommendations are on the agenda for tomorrow's workshop, so that this group will dig a little bit deeper and then provide any feedback that you may have that we'll take to the next broker responsibility working group hopefully with some draft rule language, and we'll get through that. And I think you make a great point, Commissioner Miller, on it's that type of brokerage activity.
I say turn your mics on, and then I don't. But on that idea, it's the type of activity, and it's not just your first 3 of anything. Also, there's not an end game to that because some folks will never do every type. And what does that look like from documentation standpoint? So we'll work through that tomorrow, and we've got some dedicated time on that and on the 2-day response period. So looking forward to that and taking a recommendation from a committee and then really workshopping it and giving you all the opportunity to provide that feedback before it's in a rule that's being proposed.
And I think, that was one of the tough parts of the discussion that we had that day was you think about mentoring and training and things like that, and you naturally tend towards new licensees with something like that. But the truth of the matter is that same supervision is owed somebody who's been in the business 10 years who would like to move their specialty from residential to farm and ranch or residential to commercial or something like that.
And Commissioner Woodruff.
First, I compliment you all for attacking this obvious big issue, and I'm sure it's got tentacles that go everywhere because it obviously, for me, it's like, okay, so farm and ranch, commercial, property management, that's going to put the broker in a very different position, and I think one they need to be in, and I think that's. And then the other, so I like the concept. The devil will be in the details, obviously. But how do you imagine? So it's first 3. Really, from a reporting it standpoint, it's hard to know from the outside. So is that presumably an internal? I mean, would you imagine? I'm just curious how you imagine something.
So we talked about that on a number of fronts, and there was
very immediate feedback to the idea of having some sort of sign-off on a contract, that brokers would not want to sign a contract that could potentially place them in a position where they were party to said contract. And that was pretty immediate feedback. The other part of that is when you're not using a promulgated form, that becomes more difficult to police as well. And so the idea was that would be an internal process that would be checked up on by Mr. Malloy and his cohorts when a complaint is filed. And then lastly, and I failed to mention this, that our, excuse me, our idea for some of the awareness in this would be to partner with Summer here and then partner with state and local trade associations to try to get the word out to really emphasize this point as much as possible, in addition to putting it in the broker responsibility course.
And I'll add to that. It is on. Commissioner Woodruff, the documentation question is one that internally we've all been talking about, of what does that look like? Is it something that they're required, and I'm saying they, who is they? Is it the broker that's maintaining it? Is it the agent? Because we're trying to get more broker responsibility, but if you're the agent and you need that documentation, are you both holding on to it? Is it something that you are required to maintain and produce if a complaint is filed against you? Because as I just mentioned, there's no end game. It's not like trying to get your broker experience points where everyone's trying to reach an ultimate goal. There are some folks who will only engage in one type of brokerage activity for their entire career, or someone who will make that change after 20 years. And so I think we have to be, as staff, really mindful of when we're putting some sort of documentation requirement, like what does that look like for every type of license holder that's impacted? And I don't have an answer right now.
Well, and you know, to add to the complication of that, in a market like today, where let's say you have a new licensee and they're representing a buyer and they have to put 10 offers in, do all 10 of those offers count as activity? Or is it just an executed contract? Which also was part of the discussion of, do we have these documents and things like that checked prior to them going in front of a consumer, which is its own spider web. So it was not easy. It was not easy.
Chance, I have a question too. I don't recall, and I could be totally wrong, I don't recall us talking about that the signature would put more liability or such on the broker. I remember you saying that could ruin a multiple offer situation or whatever. I don't understand why the broker couldn't be required to oversee contracts. I know when I got my license, everything had to be turned in within 3 days.
Right.
So I'm unsure of where that was going, and I'm kind of unsure of the enforcement of this, and which I've mentioned, and I don't know how that's this. I think it's an improvement. I don't know how it's going to change the competency and move us from where we are now to a more competent agent, which would be more valuable to the consumer.
Well, I think that, you know, going back to the original point, the conversation about having somebody sign off the contract, I believe that Commissioner Miller and Bob Jacobs both were commenting that they would not be okay with signing off on a contract because it could potentially make them party to it. Now, what would happen internally inside their brokerage as far as signing off, that's totally different. But as far as there being a line on a contract for them to sign, they were not keen on that idea at all. And I would tend to agree.
Chair Kestner, I think we talked about this at one time too, and I don't think you had a problem with it, but in the years past, years ago, didn't the broker sign anyways?
In the years past, brokers signed it, and we did have that conversation. Then I did some research, and the signature was removed. It was never a signature. It was just supposed to be a printed name. It was never an acknowledgement of them but signing it. So I do know they vetted it. And we did have that conversation, and you know, this is a process. This is a process where we're trying to get more broker responsibility. And unfortunately, there's not a magic pill. And we have talked about everything. And the entire mission, and last time you appeared before us, I asked you, bring us something. Bring us something so we can move the ball forward. It's not the magic pill. I think it's a start. And I think with the position we're in, with the communications, I think the position we're in, rewriting the brokerage class, rewriting the broker responsibility class, I think all this is moving it forward. There was a lot of good ideas. We thought, point system, I think every idea has came out. And is it the perfect solution? No, but I think after the workshop tomorrow, we have some really good ideas, and I think 3 is better than none. And then defining the transactions, I think when we communicate with the agents and the consumers know the agent is also responsible for returning a phone call or communication within 2 days, I think it's getting to the end result. I wish there was A, B, C, D to get there, but it's a start. And I think it's something that we will continue to work on tomorrow at the workshop. I think it's something that we better continue to work on as a commission the entire term we serve, because broker responsibility is a big issue to protect the consumer. Thank y'all for bringing this. I will tell you quite honestly, your job is not finished.
No.
Either broker responsibility, ESAC, broker lawyer, or any other part, because that is something we definitely take to heart. But any other questions? I'm looking forward to tomorrow in the workshop. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Sean Emmerich.
Sir.
Chair of the Real Estate Inspector Committee.
Weekly report, right?
Okay.
Afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Sean Emmerich. We met on the TREC Inspectors Committee, met on April 18th. Not a real long agenda, but we covered some items, clarifying the language on report delivery requirements of 2 days. That's recently was changed or clarified a year or so back, and we're just trying to add language to kind of deal with and consumers paying for the report maybe multiple days in advance. Some discussions came up about paying at close and stuff, so we're looking at all those to try to clarify the language on that. We had some discussion on the single item inspections. So currently inspectors are allowed to use whatever form they want if they're going to do a single item only. And with how hot the market is, inspectors and different parties involved in a real estate transaction are looking at ways to try to move through the transactions and do walkthrough inspections, or just do a single item inspection, a foundation or something like that. So we're looking at ways, maybe requiring the report template to be used on all real estate transaction inspections. That way it kind of informs the client that all these sections were not checked. So if the inspector goes out and just does a walkthrough and only inspects a roof, at least the client is informed of all the other sections that were not checked, because there's a big need for clients that are pushing on the option periods or not having any option periods at all. So we're just looking at different avenues of that. So I think one thing we're looking at is just requiring the report form to be used on any type of real estate inspection. And then just some clarification on language that will come up later on. Be presented to y'all later. It's just clarifying language where the inspectors know that if their license has a late renewal, that they do not have the ability to work while they're waiting to be renewed. So that's all we had.
A quick question, and it's not really based on your report. I've been receiving a bunch of inspections lately that are pretty much very vague and just let me cover myself kind of thing. This is what it is, no dates, like about a water heater or whatever. You should call a plumber. And every section is like that. I got one the other day and I'm like telling a client, we can't go by this because it's just, because it was on my listing.
Right.
But there was nothing to it anymore. And so I don't know if that's been discussed or what the rules are for that, but these inspections, people are scared to get sued, so they're not writing anything on the inspection reports anymore.
Yeah, and I think some of that's coming out of, and we have brought this up before and probably will visit again, is a lot of people are moving to software that's handheld. So it's very difficult to be real specific on software that's like that, where you're just clicking and taking pictures. And so you're clicking on comments, the roof is messed up, and you're not providing any details. So it's something we've looked at in the past and we'll continue to look at, is how to deal with the fact that, that the inspection report has to be presented, because a lot of people like to go straight to the summary.
Right.
And then two, making sure that the software is providing reports that have enough detail in it so people can figure out what's actually wrong with the property.
Okay.
Versus duplicating the same report over and over.
Yeah, it just seems like buyers now are being told, oh, you need a plumber, you need an electrician, you need a roofer to verify all of this. So then what's the necessity of the inspector if you're telling them to go get all this?
Right. And I think that just comes down to communications from the inspector, making sure that they understand that we're a generalist and that we go through the whole home, but there is a need for clarification on that. And our standards of practice call for that, but like I said, I think inspectors are trying to do as many inspections as they can a day because they have a large workload right now, and so they're doing a lot of handheld generated reports that get very vague. So.
All right, other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we will move to agenda item 15. I'm sorry, 13, public comments. I have not received any public comments. We will now move to agenda item number 14, contested cases. Agenda item 14 is consideration of possible action regarding proposals, decision SOA docket 32921, 3921, 2291, REC TREC versus Cody Dean Carr. Is there anyone here to speak on behalf of Mr. Carr? Okay, I will ask Mr. Malloy to begin. And commissioners, remember, questions can be asked. It needs to be relevant to the record. And please carry on.
All right. Good afternoon. Today we only have one PFD up for your review and consideration. So in this case, the commission was seeking a denial of Mr. Carr's sales agent application. He had the burden of proof in this matter. He committed 3 criminal offenses since 2001, misdemeanor offense of burglary with a vehicle, and what we were really seriously concerned about, 2 counts of first-degree felony offense of aggravated sexual assault of a child under 14. He was convicted of these 2 felonies and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was released in November of 2019, and he was required to register as a sex offender for life. As I've seen, if you reviewed the PFD, it goes in graphic detail of these felony offenses and who it dealt with, who the victim was. So I'm not going to really touch on that. But we did, excuse me, after reviewing those, and the judge reviewed the rehabilitative efforts and took into consideration of these criminal offenses. The ALJ determined that it was appropriate, that it was not yet fit to receive a sales agent license, and recommended denying his application. So therefore, the staff recommends adopting the PFD and recommends that the applicant's sales agent application be denied. The attorney that handled the matter is not available today. The expert witness that testified for the commission, Ms. Cooper, is here, and so I can answer questions best I can.
Any questions? All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 15. We will adjourn to executive session at 12:35 to discuss pending litigation, obtain advice on legal counsel on agenda items pursuant to the Texas Government Code 551.071. I expect we will be re-adjourned around 1:35 an hour. We are adjourned. Back to order at 155. We will go back to agenda item number 15. Agenda item 14. And Director of Enforcement Michael Malloy is here. If you have any questions, he'll be glad to answer. Any questions or comments on the contested case? Comments? Any? Commissioner Woodruff?
Yes, I would.
Any comments or
comments.
concerns?
I would like to just make one comment, and that's, as commissioners, we always just have to remember what we're here for, and a big portion of why we serve this public is to protect them.
Other comments? All right.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to
Commissioner Pena.
I just want to point out on the PFD with respect to the type of offense and when it relates to children in particular, I take these very seriously. And to me, the way the PFD was written, it appears that the ability of this respondent to obtain his license was based on the passage of time and the very little amount of time that has passed since the offense and the time served. However, I believe that the courts do require offenders such as these to register as sex offenders for life for a reason. And so I just want to make my opinion known that I'm having a very hard time in allowing someone of this nature to obtain licensure because of what he did. I think it's extremely predatory, especially when it comes to a child, and that really bothers me a lot. And so I'm not sure that, you know, if this gentleman would come back in 2 years or 4 years, that I would be inclined to even consider granting him his licensure. But again, that's my opinion with respect to a sexual predator, especially of a child. And so I just wanted to make that opinion known this time.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. I would entertain a motion.
I move to adopt the PFD as written.
I have a motion by Commissioner Woodruff, second by Commissioner Hartgraves. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Thank y'all. We'll go to agenda item number 16, and if someone will bring Abby a tall stool, I think she's going to be up here for a while.
I'll need that.
She's going to talk about the possible rules for adoption that were proposed in February and also go over some proposed rules, correct?
Correct. Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. For the record, Abby Lee, Deputy General Counsel. Agenda item 16 is discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 531. In the interest of time, the specific sections up for adoption are listed in the agenda and included in your materials. The repeal, new rules, and amendments to Chapter 531 are made as a result of the Commission's quadrennial rule review. You'll hear that a lot today. The repeal and renumbering of 531.1, 531.2, and 531.3 makes way to add a new definition section for ease of reading. The changes also update terminology for consistency throughout the chapter. No comments were received on the amendments as published, but staff recommends making one non-substantive change to the text, the insertion of the word Texas before occupations in 531.1 subsection 2. The staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 531 as presented to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for adoption.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that the Commission approve the staff's recommendation.
Have a motion made by Commissioner Wilkinson, second by Commissioner Miller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Agenda item number 17.
Agenda item number 17 is discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 533. Again, the specific sections being amended are listed in the agenda and included in your materials. The amendments to Chapter 533, again, are made as a result of the quadrennial rule review. The changes update terminology for consistency throughout the chapter. In terms of changes of note, Section 533.5, the title of that section, is updated to better reflect the content of the section, and language is removed that was inconsistent with applicable law. Subsection F of 533.7 is amended to more closely align with applicable statute, and then finally subsection D of 533.8 is amended to increase transparency regarding the motion for rehearing process. No comments were received on the amendments as published. The staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 533 as published to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for adoption.
Chair would entertain a motion.
I move to accept.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Miller, second by Commissioner Woodruff. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Agenda item number 18.
Agenda item 18 is discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 534. Again, specific sections being amended are listed in the agenda and included in your materials. The amendments to Chapter 534 are made as a result of quadrennial rule review. The proposed repeal and renumbering of 534.1 is to make room for a new definition section for ease of reading. And the proposed amendments also update terminology for consistency throughout the chapter. Additionally, 534.4 and 534.5 are amended to correct references to applicable regulations. No comments were received on the amendments as published, and the staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 534 as published to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for adoption.
I move that the commission approve staff's recommendation.
Motion made by Commissioner Miller,
Second.
second Commissioner Woodruff. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Motion carries. Agenda item number 19.
Agenda item 19 is discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 535. The specific sections being amended are listed in the agenda and included in your materials. This is not a quadrennial rule review adopted change. This is based on statutory requirements enacted by the 87th Legislature in House Bill 2730. So for instance, the term easement or right-of-way has been added to several sections to require completion of qualifying and continuing education courses to obtain or maintain a certificate of registration. The amendments to 535.61 allow an accredited college or university, as well as the United States Armed Forces Institute, to submit ERW qualifying courses for credit approval without becoming approved providers, similar to the exceptions that exist in for both real estate and inspector qualifying courses. The amendments to 535.66, as a side note, address credit for ERW courses offered by an accredited college or university as well. And the changes in 535.61 also clarify that the calculation for the exam passage rate only includes license categories for which a provider offers courses and an examination is required. A new rule, 535.68, mirrors the House Bill 2730 content requirements for the ERW qualifying course and adopts a course approval form by reference that outlines the units required to be addressed in each course topic. Also, new Rule 535.406 implements the continuing education requirements of that bill. The amendments to 535.400 add specific requirements for the issuance of a probationary certificate as required by the bill. The amendments to 535.403 clarify that a certificate holder who fails to timely renew must apply for and receive a new registration, and clarifies what happens if registration falls or expires rather on a Saturday, Sunday, or other day that the Commission is not open. No comments were received on the amendments as published. However, staff recommends 3 non-substantive changes to the text: the insertion of the word Texas before occupations in sections 535.66E1, 535.68, and 535.406. The staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit for adoptions amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 535 as presented to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for adoption, with an effective date of September 1st, 2022, with the exception of 535.406, which will have an effective date of January 1st, 2023, to correspond with implementation of statutory requirements.
Motion made by Commissioner Lerner.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Miller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Agenda item number 20.
Moving right along, agenda item 20 is discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 541 as follows: 22 TAC 541.1 criminal history guidelines, and 22 TAC 541.2 criminal history evaluation letters. The amendments to Chapter 541 are made as a result of quadrennial rule review. The changes define Texas Real Estate Commission for ease of reading and consistency, and subsection D of 541.1 is amended to better reflect the applicable statutory requirements found in Section 53.023 of the Occupations Code. Additionally, the title of 541.2 is amended to reflect the terminology used in Section 1101.353 of the Occupations Code. No comments were received on the amendments as published, and the staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 541 as published to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for adoption.
Move that the Commission approve staff's recommendation.
Motion made by Commissioner Lerner.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Miller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. We will go to agenda item number 21. These are rules for possible proposal.
Great. So agenda item 21 is discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 537. The specific sections being amended are listed in the agenda and included in your materials. The proposed amendments and new rules to Chapter 537 are made as a result of quadrennial rule review. Texas real estate license holders are generally required to use forms promulgated by TREC when negotiating contracts for the sale of property. And the proposed changes to the existing rules add the title of the associated form to the rule title, as well as add clarifying language to specify which forms are for mandatory versus voluntary use by license holders. The new rules pair previously existing forms that were available for voluntary use by license holders with a rule to provide greater clarity about the form's purpose and use. The staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit the proposed amendments and new rules to 22 TAC Chapter 537 and the forms adopted by reference as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal to the Texas Register for publication and public comment.
I move that the Commission approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Lerner, second by Commissioner Woodruff. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item number 22.
Agenda item 22 is discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 537 as follows: 22 TAC 537.26, Standard Contract Form TREC number 15-5, the seller's temporary residential lease, and 22 TAC 537.27, the Standard Contract Form TREC number 16-5, the buyer's temporary residential lease, as well as a new 22 TAC 537.61, Standard Contract Form TREC number 54-0, landlord's floodplain and flood notice. So this is what Vanessa mentioned to you earlier. This comes from a statutory requirement. So House Bill 531 requires a landlord to disclose in certain situations whether the landlord is aware that the dwelling is located in a 100-year floodplain and whether the landlord is aware that the dwelling has flooded within the past 5 years. Because landlords of temporary residential leases are not exempted, the proposed changes creates a new flood disclosure form and adds a new paragraph referencing that new form, that notice, in both the seller's temporary residential lease and the buyer's temporary residential lease. In addition to these changes, the proposed amendments to the temporary residential lease for a buyer and seller in 535.26 and 27 contain proposed changes made as a result of the quadrennial rule review as well. Those changes add the corresponding contract form title to the rule title and add clarifying language to specify that both of the forms adopted by reference in these rules are for mandatory use by license holders, similar to what you just approved for proposal. The staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit the proposed amendments and new rule to 22 TAC Chapter 537 and the forms adopted by reference as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal to the Texas Register for publication and public comment.
Move that the Commission approve staff's recommendation.
Motion made by Commissioner Lerner,
Second.
second Commissioner Woodruff. Any discussion? Commissioner Miller.
Do I understand it correctly that all leases in Texas now, if they are using promulgated forms, which there's no promulgated lease form, right? But they are required by statute, I guess, to do the landlord's floodplain and flood notice form to every lease?
So yes and no. So there is a statutory requirement in place now for landlords to make this disclosure in certain situations. So if they are in a floodplain, they've got to make that disclosure, whether they're or not they're aware. And then I think how the bill is phrased, if they're aware of damage caused to the property within the past 5 years, they've got to make that disclosure. So that is required for all landlords, regardless of whether you are talking about a temporary residential lease like the Commission has promulgated forms for, or a typical residential lease that we don't have promulgated forms for. In terms of this particular form, we are not going to require that every single license holder who is involved with a lease transaction has to use this particular version of that disclosure. They could use this form. For instance, say they were using a Texas Realtors residential lease. They could use our form, the Commission's promulgated form, or they could use another form that contains the same statutory language. But for our temporary residential leases, we reference this form in that language. We also say it could be another compliant notice. So it's that the statute requires this type of notice. We're not requiring this particular form to be used as long as the license holder uses a form that complies with the statutory requirements, if that makes sense.
What I've found is that most residential sales agents who deal with the seller to buyer and buyer's temporary residential lease don't know anything about the landlord's floodplain and flood notice at all. They've never even heard of it. And I think it's mentioned in one of the legal 1 or 2 now. But this is going to be a major overhaul to educating residential salespeople.
Yeah, I agree.
It's going to require lots and lots of communication on it.
Yeah, I agree.
So when the legislator passed this, we had to add temporary lease. Now that it's in the temporary leases, we had to add some type of form for them. And they refer to it or other compliant notice.
Correct.
Nobody pays attention to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Information about flooded areas or whatever it's called, can you use that with a lease, or you have to use this type of form?
I think you might be referring to a Texas Realtors form.
Information about flood hazard areas that you use with a purchase.
That's not going to contain the statutory language that's required, and I'm not as familiar with that particular. I think that was maybe a Texas Realtors form, and so that wouldn't satisfy the requirements in this situation. But I know that it's a form that's used.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item number 23.
23. Agenda item 23 is discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 543. The specific sections being amended are listed in the agenda and included in your materials. The proposed repeal of these sections and the new rules are made as a result of quadrennial rule review, and specifically, are the result of a proposed new definition section in this chapter, which requires the renumbering of sections. So we will renumber and replace those rules with some proposed changes. The proposed changes update terminology for consistency throughout the chapter as well. Proposed Rule 543.5 forms and 543.13 renewal of registration also correct a reference to a commission form. So those are the changes of note in this section. The staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the commission to submit the proposed repeal and new rules to 22 TAC Chapter 543 as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal to the Texas Register for publication and public comment.
Move that the commission approve staff's recommendation.
Motion made by Commissioner Lerner to approve.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Miller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Agenda item number 24.
24. Agenda item 24 is discussion and possible action to propose the review of 22 TAC Chapter 535 General Provisions. This is actually the last chapter that we have to look at under quadrennial rule review. So this is the last time this year you'll do this. Pursuant to Section 2001.039 of the Government Code and the FY22 Rule Review Plan, the Commission rules found within this chapter will be reviewed and considered for readoption, revision, or repeal. The review will will include whether the reasons for initially adopting these rules continues to exist. The staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to submit the review of 22 TAC Chapter 535 as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal to the Texas Register for publication and public comment.
Move that the commission approve staff's recommendation.
Motion made by Commissioner Lerner to approve.
Second.
Second, Commissioner Miller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Abstaining? Motion carries. Agenda item number 25.
Agenda item 25 is discussion and possible action to conclude the review of 22 TAC as follows. Chapter 531, Canons of Professional Ethics and Conduct. Chapter 533, Practice and Procedure. Chapter 534, General Administration. And Chapter 541, Rules Relating to the Provisions of the Texas Occupations Code, Chapter 53. After review of these chapters as part of the quadrennial rule review, staff has determined that the reason justification for adopting the rules within these chapters continues to exist. Furthermore, the review process indicated that certain rules needed to be amended for clarity or to better reflect applicable law, policies, or procedures, and these amendments were adopted earlier in this meeting. No comments were received regarding the Commission's notice of review of these chapters. Therefore, the staff recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of the Commission to close the review of 22 TAC Chapters 531, 533, 534, and 541 as presented.
Move that the commission approve staff's recommendation.
Motion made by Commissioner Lerner.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Wilkinson. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, let's go to agenda item number 28. Deputy Executive Director Tony Slagle.
Good afternoon, Chair Kestner and Commissioners. I am Tony Slagle, Deputy Executive Director. What we are discussing under this agenda item is the draft of the agency's fiscal year 2023-2027 strategic plan, which you were emailed, I believe, separately in a separate email. As we've discussed previously, this document is primarily used for the legislative appropriations process, of which we are not a part of because we're an SDSI agency. However, all agencies are required to submit this document, prepare and submit it every 2 years, and it's due on June 1st. Before I begin with my summary, I just want to thank publicly, this is a group effort. I want to thank the division directors for their help in this. I want to thank also MJ, she's not here, but MJ Griffin for putting it together and keeping everyone organized. So I just wanted to say that. In general, this draft is similar to our last strategic plan. It's been updated, as the executive director said earlier, to streamline some of the more narrative aspects of it, as well as to update the current statistics and data where appropriate. It's required to be organized in a specific way. There are templates that we're required to use and required to follow. The document's broken up into 3 main sections to include the agency's mission, philosophy, and motto, an accounting of our operational goals, which must include a description of the actions taken to achieve those goals and how those goals support the various statewide objectives, a description of any redundancies and impediments identified by the agency that could negatively impact agency operations or negatively impact our stakeholders. Also included in the plan are several supplemental documents, including a list of the agency's performance measures, the agency's hub plan, workforce plan, and our current customer service report. The performance measures have been reorganized based on a couple of things. We organized them by agency before they were split up by performance measure type. We thought organizing by agency would be better, as well as some of them are reclassified from, say, an outcome measure to a output measure, just based on what the actual, they hadn't been looked at in a while, so that was done. There is one change to one of the metrics that I believe we've discussed previously, which is to increase the average hold time from 1 minute to 2 minutes. So that's also noted in the strategic plan. I did want to just remind the commission that this applies to both the commission and the board. So there are parts of it that apply specifically to each body, but there are also parts that apply to both. So based on what your intent today is, whether you want to change it or you're okay with it as approved or as drafted, there are a couple of recommended staff recommendations to go forward with based on that, mainly because the board also needs to look at it at their Friday meeting, and they may have some changes as well. So there's a need to delegate the final approval of this to the executive committee so they can review any of those changes going forward. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? So if we adopt it with the staff recommendations and then the board makes any changes, we need to make sure everybody's okay with the executive committee approving the changes for the June 1st deadline.
And I have a recommended motion. I just didn't know how you wanted to move forward on it. If you wanted to make any changes, we could do that. Or if you're okay with it as presented, I have a recommended motion based on
any changes?
Okay. So based on that, staff's recommendation is to approve the FY 2023-2027 strategic plan as presented and to delegate final approval of the plan to the executive committee in the event that the appraiser board recommends any changes to sections of the plan that might impact both the commission and the appraiser board. So just a bit of clarification. If they make changes just to the appraiser board section, there will likely not be a need for the executive committee to meet on that particular item.
Okay, we have a motion. A recommendation for a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Woodruff.
Second.
Second, Commissioner Pena. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstaining, motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Up next, agenda item number 29, General Counsel Vanessa Burgess.
Okay. Agenda item 29 is discussion and possible action regarding renewal of agency contract with Pearson VUE. The commission entered into a contract with Pearson VUE for license examination, development, and administrative services in 2020. The initial term of the contract was 2 years with 2 optional 2-year renewals. The initial term of the contract is set to expire on August 31st, 2022. Staff seeks commission approval to enter into the first of those 2-year renewal periods. The contract is a pass-through contract where exam takers pay Pearson VUE examination fees directly. However, the agency does collect from Pearson VUE a $10 remittance fee for each exam they administer as part of the terms of the contract, and they administer exams on behalf of both TREC and TALCB. The anticipated fee collection for the renewal period will be approximately $970,000 for both TREC and TALCB. The staff recommendation is to exercise the first 2-year renewal term on the agency's contract with Pearson VUE for license, education, development, and administrative services.
Entertain a motion.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Motion made by Commissioner Pena, second by Commissioner Miller. I've got one question. So it's just renewing the existing contract. The $10 fee was in the original contract. Does their fee remain the same? Do we know? Is it set in the contract?
Yes.
So their fee remains the same also? Okay. All right.
So effectively, everything carries forward for another 2 years, and the next renewal would be August of 2024?
Yes. I trust your math, yes, in
Yeah.
terms of the years, yes.
He is a CPA.
You don't
Any
want
other
my
dis-
math.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Agenda item number 30, discussion possible action regarding future agenda items. Anything? Okay, how about future meetings? I show the next meeting August the 8th. Is that correct? And then August 9th is the workshop, and the other dates are there, including on Valentine's Day again.
Nice.
Yes, agenda item 32, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Miller, second by Commissioner Pena. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. We are adjourning at 2:25 PM.